Good evening and welcome to tonight's STEM Cafe, Trash Talk, Thinking Recycling. This talk was originally scheduled for last April in a restaurant. Our guest speakers are Dr. Courtney Gallagher, Associate Professor in the NIU Department of Geographic and Atmospheric Sciences, as well as the Center for the Study of Women, Gender, and Sexuality, and Megan Maves, Total Recycling Program Manager with Waste Management Recycling. She will address specific recycling questions. Thank you for joining us this evening for a little trash talk. Tonight you will learn ways in which we consume products, types of materials they are made from, and the environmental and social justice implications of our recycling industry. This is Financial Literacy Month, so I am sure you're going to hear ways that reduce, reuse, recycle will produce savings for the environment, but also for your own finances. I'm Dr. Judy Diamond, organizer of the STEM Cafes for the past 8 years and your host for this evening. Our STEM Cafes are brought to you by NIU STEAM in the Center for P20 Engagement at Northern Illinois University. NIU STEAM refers to science, technology, engineering, the arts, and math. STEM Cafes are fun, casual gatherings where adults can eat, drink, and chat with STEM professionals about hot topics and the latest research. We usually hold our STEM Cafes in restaurants and look forward to getting back to those restaurants, but tonight you will need to provide your own favorite snacks, carry-outs, and drinks. In the meantime, Fatty's Pub and Grill, one of our partner restaurants, is offering a 10% discount to anyone who mentions that they attend this evening. Thanks to the generosity of our patrons, we are able to offer this STEM Cafe free of charge. Please consider making a donation so we can continue to provide engaging programs like this one. We want our STEM Cafes to be available to everyone, so we are not charging for registration. Any donation is appreciated, small or large. The link to donate is go.niu.edu/give-NIU-STEAM. For those of you that have not attended our STEM Cafes before, our format for this evening is as follows. Our speakers will talk for approximately an hour together. During the talk and following the talk, you can send in your questions and comments. We know there are many experts out there in the audience, so often our attendees add to the discussion with their comments and insight. We will end by 8 p.m. If you experience a difficulty during the presentation with hearing, you can find a volume control on your screen that can be adjusted to your liking. I believe it is in the bottom left-hand corner. This cafe will be recorded. It will be posted on our website in about a week, as we need to be sure that we have closed captions so it is accessible to all. We welcome your feedback. If you are interested in providing feedback or making a suggestion for a future NIU STEM Cafe, you can find a link to a survey which is in our chat, so you can see that anytime during the evening, and or otherwise you can always contact me at jdymond@niu.edu. By the way, this particular topic was suggested by one of our audience members. Our next STEM Cafe will be held on May 12th at 6 p.m. and the topic is Fueling the Future with Renewable Energy. And our speaker will be Dr. Tao Xu, NIU Presidential Research Professor in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry. So let's get started. Tonight's virtual STEM Cafe is Trash Talk, Rethinking Recycling with Dr. Courtney Gallagher and Megan Maves. Recycling is a complex process. Many of our recyclable products are not recycled in the ways we imagine. If you put a used plastic bottle, a food carton, or a cereal box in your recycling bin, what happens to it? Tonight our speakers will discuss the recycling industry and explore how people interact with and manage their environment. We will learn how we generate and handle waste and how it impacts us. You may write any questions you have during the talks in the Q&A. We will only use the chat for any concerns other than questions for the speakers, and also for the survey link. The speakers will answer the questions after both of the talks are completed. And so now we would like to introduce Courtney. So I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Courtney Gallagher, who describes herself as a human environment geographer. Dr. Gallagher is an associate professor joint between the Department of Geographic and Atmospheric Sciences and the Center for the Study of Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies at Northern Illinois University. She has a new additional responsibility. Beginning this summer, she will be our new campus sustainability coordinator. Dr. Gallagher studies how people interact with and manage their environment. Much of her research has been in large African cities where she studied urban food production. Her African studies intersect directly with issues of improper waste management, as people often grow food on informal dump sites and use wastewater for irrigation. As a result of her work in Africa, Courtney continues to be interested in how societies think about and manage waste. Since both trash and recycling services often create vast social inequities in terms of who receives services and who is impacted by the handling and processing of our waste. I'd also like to welcome Megan Maves, who has been with Waste Management for the past 10 years and has a total of 16 years working in sustainable design fields. Megan focuses on finding ways to increase landfill diversion by launching, maintaining, and educating the Chicago area on the benefits of recycling and food scrap composting programs. In her past positions, Megan has been a sustainability consultant with Canon Design, working as a leadership in energy and environmental design project administrator for schools projects, and as LEED reviewer for Green Building Certification Institute. She also worked for Chicago Department of Environment at Chicago Center for Green Technology. We will begin with Megan. Hope I have this right. Megan, would you like to begin?
Sure, let me just get the video shared, or the screen, I should say. Okay. Judy, is the screen sharing?
Yes, it is. It looks great.
Thank you very much. So thank you all for having me tonight. Again, my name is Megan Maves with Waste Management Recycling Services. I wanted to start off this evening by giving us sort of an introduction to waste management. I think most folks have either seen the logo or seen our green trucks on the road. Waste Management is a North American company primarily focused in the United States and Canada. We are an environmental solutions company. And while it's easy to look at us and think about things like the landfill and garbage hauling, I think a lot of folks are surprised to realize that recycling is actually about 13% of our core business. Waste Management is currently the largest recycler in North America, and most people are familiar with our programs through our single stream recycling facilities. So we currently own and operate over 46 single stream facilities in North America, in addition to 30 commercial paper only or high grade paper recycling facilities. In the last few years, we've also increased our holdings of commercial composting facilities beyond just things like yard waste or C&D construction and grinding facilities to also incorporate food scrap and waste. So we've really been focused on sort of promoting a lot of the sustainability aspects that we've integrated into our company, and also letting people know about how embedded recycling is in what we do every day. So I like to always start my presentations by referring to the reasons that we recycle. I think a lot of us started recycling when we were young. We either started it as a practice in elementary school. Maybe one day we woke up and there was a recycling bin outside of our home, and we were told by our municipalities that we were going to start recycling our newspaper, our glass bottles. And we generally recycle because we feel that recycling is the right thing to do. It's, very much just something we don't question. We know that we're supposed to recycle and we're supposed to keep things out of the landfill. Recycling for the recycling community is very much a business practice though, and it's a formal practice. It's not just a method of environmental protection, which it certainly is, but it's basically a business process that's designed to create secondary feedstocks for industry. So waste management's a little interesting where, if we stop at a home or an apartment building or on campus at NIU, those folks are our customers. You are providing us with these raw feedstocks that we have to sort and process. But the companies and businesses that we sell that feedstock to, the paper and the bottles and the cans that we collect, are also our customers because we have to provide them with a product or a service that they want to purchase from us. So what we've been trying to do as a company is kind of demystify recycling a little bit. It's not just this thing that happens behind the curtain that nobody really knows what happens to it. If it's something that we can collect and capture and resell, it's a business practice, and we're trying to streamline and make as much of that as transparent as possible. Basically, recycling is something that makes good business sense when it's done correctly, and that's what our focus is, being that it's such a primary part of our day-to-day operations at WM. So when we start to talk about recycling as an industry, it's kind of impossible to talk about how to recycle correctly or recycle right without taking stock about where the recycling industry is. So if anybody's Googled recycling in the last couple of years, you've probably gotten about 8 billion hits back about recycling in China and where does our product actually go. Back in 2017, or I should say prior to 2017, China was the primary consumer of most of the recycled paper and plastic material generated in the world. So that's not just material from the United States, but from most developed nations that were relying on export for their recycling practices. In 2017, and actually leading up into 2017, China was conducting extensive surveys on basically ships that were exporting from the United States and other countries to what was their own business practices were buying up this material. They were going through their own economic boom. They had all these manufacturing interests that really needed, access to this paper, this cardboard, different plastics in order to produce and to keep their economy fueled. But one of the things that they were finding out is that in their zealousness to bring in recycled product, not all of that was necessarily up to snuff, just in terms of cleanliness and what the packs were. They had a company that stated that they were buying paper, but they might open a paper their products or unauthorized materials in there as well. So China did a few kind of test bans and test cases and sort of warned the companies and the rest of the world that this couldn't go on forever. But when the streams didn't magically clean up overnight, China said no more. And they said, we are banning all imports into China in 2020. What this did was create sort of a glut for the recycling community. And currently we have about 13.2 million tons per year of recyclables that are now basically the other existing marketplaces for recycling. And everybody's trying to have the cleanest stream, the best stream, and find ways that they're not interrupting their own supply chains by trying to recycle these through avenues other than export or other than sending things overseas to China. If we tried to take 13.2 million tons, which sounds like an insanely large number, and make that relevant, I kind of like to use this next slide just to sort of show where we were in 2017. Again, I already mentioned WM is already the US's largest recycler. And one of the things that we were finding out was, by 2017, we kind of saw the writings on the wall. So we weren't exporting everything, but about 62% or around 63%, we were already maintaining in domestic markets. We knew we were going to have to ramp that up. And by 2019, that had climbed to 77%. We're still getting the 2020 numbers together. We're assuming we're just pushing 80% with domestic mills right now for, again, all of our paper and plastics. We've actually stopped exporting all residential plastics as of the last 5 years. And it's just one of those things for recycling. Anything that we can do now to keep that material close to home is our approach as a recycling company. We still do have some export markets. Mexico's been holding steady around around 3% of our materials. We've had some other Southeast Asian countries take up a little bit of the slack, but for the most part, there's not going to be sort of, for a better, lack of better phrase, a silver bullet sort of country like China was that's going to be suddenly absorbing all of that excess recycling material. So anything that we do in terms of what we bring in has to be clean, durable, and it has to be consistent enough as a recycling stream that we can find those avenues close to home. So we know that we can continue to recycle everything that we state that we're recycling, that we're trying to collect through our various programs across the country. So what does this mean for recycling just in terms of the current state of things? So add all of the China sort of backstory into that. And then obviously the big news item over 2020 has been the presence of COVID-19. So one of the things that was interesting is that we kind of thought that COVID was going to be a really huge hiccup for us. Getting through the China incident kind of made us realize as an industry that we were a little bit more resilient and flexible than we had been 5 years prior, which was a good thing. Since China banned and we had to clean things up, we have been as a company investing a lot of money in our technology, our optical sorters, our robotics. We've been putting a lot of energy into education. We've been trying to, again, streamline and solidify all these domestic markets for where we send things. And one of the things that was interesting back in, March last year when things started shutting down, we had a lot of companies just reaching out to us saying, Waste Management, are you going to be able to basically, do what you say you're going to do with providing us our raw feedstock? We were hearing from cardboard companies that they couldn't just flip a switch overnight, and if they were using 100% recycled material, suddenly using virgin material, especially as economies slowed down. So this has really been one of those things where we were more adaptable, although we have found
Looks like we lost Megan for a few minutes. We're going to try to get her back on. Courtney, could you start and then maybe she can finish hers later?
You want me to launch my portion of the talk?
Yes.
Sure. Okay. See if I can.
I'm thinking she'll get back and we can just hear what she has to say later.
Is my screen sharing appropriately?
Yes, you look
Okay.
great.
All right. Well, I'm glad Megan is on this call because I don't work in the recycling industry, and I'm sure many of you have specific questions about what you can and can't recycle, and I don't know that. But what I do work on is environmental management, and so that's where my interest in waste management comes in. And as Judy mentioned at the start of this talk, my interest in recycling waste management comes from some work that I have done over the past decade and a half in East Africa. And so this is a photo from my dissertation field site in the Kibera slums of Nairobi, Kenya. It's one of the largest slums in sub-Saharan Africa. And in the photos, you can see that there's trash everywhere. And that's because the Kibera slums is an informal settlement. It's a slum, and the government doesn't formally recognize this as a place that people live, even though there's over 400,000 people living there. And oh, Megan's back. Let's. I just started.
Sorry about that.
Judy, how do you want to handle this? Should we go back to Megan? Judy? Now we've lost you.
Oh God, embarrassing. You prepared together, so I'm gonna let you make the call.
I think it works better if I follow Megan.
Okay. All right, Megan.
No,
go ahead.
that sounds.
That thought about Kenya.
Sorry, can we make me, I can't share my screen right now, and I'm not sure why it's.
You're a co-host now.
Okay, let me try this again. All right, sorry about that, everybody. Of course, it's my first technical glitch of the day. So let's see, where did I actually leave off in the last slide? So anyway, I left off talking about technological investments. Did we see this slide before I was disconnected?
No.
Okay, so I'll start with this slide. So in terms of technological investments, because of the fact waste management has been so heavily involved with recycling being part of our core business, despite what was happening with China in the last 5 years, we've actually been increasing our investments in the recycling industry. We've opened 5 new MRFs, which are material reclamation facilities, since 2018. We've been upgrading our existing infrastructure, and we've spent another $42 million installing 96 new and upgraded optical sorters. All of this has been part and parcel to ensuring that we can maintain our recycling streams, maintain all of our supply chain, our raw feedstock coming in. So that way, especially as we continue to work with more businesses and more entities, we feel confident in saying we can take in this material, process it cleanly, get it out where it needs to be in the end marketplace. In terms of materials, what's happening right now as a direct result of COVID, though, is that we find that residential volumes are remaining high. Our supply from that really hasn't deviated since 2017. So even though 5 years ago, China said, well, we aren't really going to be looking to take this product in anymore, didn't stop the volume of consumption and supply that was coming in from the marketplace. And we had generally a high volume of residential and commercial. Since 2020 in March, when a lot of the stay-at-home orders went into effect and a lot of our businesses and our institutional type of buildings were instructing people to stay home, work remotely, work from home, our commercial volumes have dropped off. Our commercial volumes used to be largely responsible for a lot of the clean paper stock that we have coming in, but we are finding that a lot of our paper stock that's coming in from the residential, single stream and multifamily marketplace has been increasing if folks have been at home. So it's enabled us to sort of supplement what would be coming in from the commercial stream. But ultimately, we're still a lot lower than we were year over year prior to COVID coming in. So one of the things that we're looking for as we come back online, as people get vaccinated, as we can kind of start to return to normal, is that we're hoping that we're going to be able to get the education out there that as people start their programs back up in these institutional buildings, that we can start off with clean stock rather than starting with a more contaminated load that we have to slowly bring back online, and we'll be ready to feed that material right back into the end marketplace. I already talked about those bullet points on the last slide. So since I'm slowing us down, one of the other big goals that we've been trying to formalize since 2017 has been sort of what we've internally called the WM battle on contamination. But this is definitely something that's been industry-wide. It's not been unique to waste management. In 2019, we added a formal goal that we wanted to reduce our inbound contamination. Contamination is basically our internal word for garbage in the recycling stream. And we wanted to reduce that to 10% or less by 2025. For us in the recycling industry, 10% tends to be around that sweet spot where if it's 10% or under, we can find that residue or that garbage, get it out of the stream and make the stream clean enough that it'll be marketable to an end marketplace. So prior to 2019, I want to say as early as 2015, 2016, we were getting reports on average that our single stream plants around the country were fluctuating maybe between 25 and 40% contamination that were coming in. So we've been battling this hard. And one of the things that we've been really proud of is that by 2019, we had reduced that number to 17% on average across all of our facilities. But one of the things that we'd been noticing, especially since the stay-at-home orders had been into effect, is a lot of that residential contamination had been creeping back up. So again, going back to making certain that we're educating and that our customers have an idea of the basics of recycling. So we know that we can hopefully avoid some of these materials, some of these wrong materials that might be coming in, to let folks know that collection is not necessarily recycling, and we can't recycle 100% of the garbage that might be mistakenly placed into a recycling bin, even if it was placed there with the best of intentions. And this is sort of my real world scary photo of contaminated recycling. So as we go through and talk about contamination, and I talk about things that don't belong, or we don't want plastic bags, or food and liquid is too high, this is really the photo that I like to put out there. This was a photo taken at our Elgin transfer facility a few years ago from one of our commercial recycling trucks that probably was going to make about 50 to 100 stops. And what you're looking at was supposed to be a recycling truck. And from this photo, it looks like a pile of garbage. And from our perspective, perspective as recyclers, when something comes in looking like a pile of garbage, at that point, it's usually a pile of garbage. It's just garbage that's in the wrong location. So what we've been doing ourselves is a lot of back end where we take our recycling trucks, we send them all to transfer stations. We have to audit every single load. And if we do see a load like this come in, we have to make a decision. Is it clean enough to actually send on to a recycling plant? Or is it something that we need to divert this load to landfill in order to protect all the other recycling that's come in? It's made things a little bit slower, but it's really allowed us by slowing it down to get a handle on what's coming in. And if we have a truck like this, allow us to work backwards from a route, contacting our customers, anybody who might be feeding material into the stream to say, where is this contamination actually generating from, so we can reach out and try to help correct our customers' behaviors. And just going on and on about contamination, it was really hard to see from that past photo or that last photo, but the contamination that comes in kind of comes at us from a number of different ways. For us, the plastic bags, in addition to hiding garbage in the stream, fall into a category called tanglers. And from the photos on the left, top and bottom, you can kind of see what happens when the plastic bags, the cords, the wire hangers, really anything stringy. We always say if you can tie it into a knot or a bow, it's something that doesn't belong in a recycling bin. But our processes are highly mechanized. And in fact, the only reason that humans are on our lines right now is because they're there looking for the residue and looking for the contamination. So depending on which recycling facility you're at in the US for waste management, 4 to 6 times a day, we actually have to shut our equipment completely down. We'll have one shift to go on break. We have guys that have to climb into the equipment, and they have pliers, hand saws, basically ways that they have to then cut all of that material off of our sorting screen when it comes in. That's just the plastic material. That middle photo, propane tanks, bowling balls, butane tanks, fire extinguishers, unemptied aerosol cans. We get a lot of special waste that sometimes present themselves as some sort of durable good that folks might think, well, my propane is used up and I don't want to take it back to the gas station. It's metal. I'm going to give it to waste management. They're going to be able to find something to do with it. So we get a lot of sort of dangerous items that come in. You know, recycling is very much a game of chutes and ladders. We get so many bowling balls a year, and I just shudder to think of a bowling ball falling off of a belt from 2 or 3 stories up when we've got humans walking around. So for us, contamination isn't just about the quality of the bales, but it's also health and safety of our employees, health and safety of, you know, our end users. If we're going to put a bale together, we don't want to be inadvertently sending them dangerous items because we might have missed something that might have been on the line. The easiest way for us is make certain that everybody's recycling the way that we need them to recycle. Just making folks aware that our quality requirements are strict, because we know our customers want to recycle. Obviously, we're invested in recycling from an economic perspective. All of our state and local governments want us to be recycling. Everybody has very limited landfill space. And so in order to maintain recycling in its current form and to make certain that we're not putting easily diverted materials into the landfill, we need to make certain that everybody's being as strict as possible with what they're putting in their bins, so we can actually do what we say we're going to do and recycle what comes in. So where do we go from here? So I wanted to kind of take it backwards, since I just showed a bunch of different photos of contamination, but some of the things that are other issues that we're dealing with in terms of what we want to recycle is that we're finding that certain things are spiking, certain things are kind of ebbing and falling off. Oh, sorry, I was worried that we were losing the stream there again for a second. So one of the things that's changed, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, is the advent of e-commerce. We've had more cardboard. We've had, you know, smaller pieces of cardboard, more packaging material coming in via cardboard. We've had changes in packaging coming in just in terms of less cans and plastic bottles, more pouches, more bags. And we've had lightweighting. We've had materials coming in terms of plastic bottles materials than they were 5 or 10 years ago. All of this means we have to recycle more volume more cubic yardage in order to try to maintain the same weights and volumes that we've recycled in the past. In addition, one of the things that we're also finding is that we need to be investing as a company in additional end markets to increase demand for recycling. It's very easy to tell everybody we should recycle, but if we don't have folks purchasing recycled commodities and doing it regularly, you should be recycling as sort of a best practice with what's happening. So one of the things that WM has been doing has been promoting policies in terms of our own purchasing policies internally and encouraging our customers to do the same. In terms of purchasing policies, we want to make certain that, you know, folks are putting things into play that indicate that they should be purchasing post-consumer, specifically recycled content. It's very easy consumer content. It tends to be cleaner and mixed up, but we want to make certain that we have end markets for post-consumer so we don't have to interrupt, again, those private municipal programs that so many people rely on from the recycling stream. And internally, we're trying to kind of put our money where our mouth is, so to speak. What we've been doing from our operations side are trying to find different ways that we can actually implement these purchasing policies. So one of the things that we've been doing is promoting an EcoCart program. With EcoCart, we've actually been working with different cart companies to develop recycling and garbage toters that are made from a minimum percentage of post-consumer recycled content. That actually took years of R&D from a lot of our different vendor partners. And as we retire old carts, we're putting these new carts into play in order to try to stimulate that post-consumer plastic demand market and make something that's more commercially viable, not only for Waste Management, but for other recycling and hauling companies that might be out there. Beyond that, sorry, advanced too quickly, we've also been trying to do this as well as with the clothes we wear. So for any of our operations, our drivers that are on the road, when you see them in safety vests, gloves, goggles, we're trying to now support our vendors that are actually purchasing recycled PET and various recycled materials to get those materials further integrated into the stream and make more of a market demand for that. So we're hopeful that by trying to put out there what we're doing in the marketplace, we can encourage other large companies to make this more standardized with their own daily practices and help stabilize and create that market drive and demand for post-consumer plastics and post-consumer content in general. And in terms of where we are now, basically, a lot of folks are trying to make decisions about what to do with their own recycling programs and their efforts. So this is also the part that we try to remind people that, you know, recycling is just one tool available. As I mentioned, we're an environmental services company. We, you know, do waste to energy, we do landfill, we do recycling. But one of the things that we're finding is that a lot of folks, as their consumption increases, is that we get questions about how much are we recycling, how much are we adding to the streams, how much can we divert after the fact. And one of the messages that for us has kind of gotten lost is that sort of reduction comes before recycling. We want to reduce before we recycle. And so our big goal has been focusing on the materials that we know that we can generate that end market for, that end capacity for, and make certain that those markets are stabilized.
We'll give her just a couple of minutes to see if
She was
she'll,
like 2 slides from the end.
yeah, she was 2 slides from the
I
end?
think so.
Okay.
If she doesn't appear right away, I can probably make her point.
Okay, so maybe you should do that.
Okay, so well, we can let her wrap up when she comes back, but
Yeah.
I know that she was talking about the idea that recycling is not the end goal. Recycling needs to be part of a waste reduction strategy, which I'll talk more about in my talk. And then the idea that if you aren't sure about what you're going to recycle, you should throw it away and then go do your research on what is recyclable in your area. So they have some cutesy slogan that I'll let Megan, when in doubt, throw it out and then find out. And so, you know, if you're holding something in your hand and you're not sure if you should recycle it, put it in the trash, go research your recycling options in your area. She has some good resources for places to look. And so when she is back, perhaps she can share that with us. And so, yeah.
Sounds good.
Do you want to switch over to me at this point, Judy? Or?
Go ahead and what are you asking?
Do you want to switch over to my portion of the talk at this point?
Yes, please
Okay.
do. And share your screen and I'll get off here.
All righty. Are we good? Okay, so I was in the middle of telling you all about my work in the Kibera slums and how there was no waste management system there. And the point that I wanted to make, Megan, I did probably a poor job of summarizing your last couple slides, but maybe we can just come back to them at the end.
Yes, let's definitely come back to the end. I'm so sorry. This is the first time today my internet's been cutting in and out. I'm so sorry.
So we'll come back to you.
Thank you.
So anyway, part of the issue with the Kibera slums being an informal settlement is that they are not recognized. There's no government programs to do waste collection and no resources to manage their waste because it's a low-income country. And so all of this got me thinking about the idea of, in countries like the United States, where we generate far more waste than on average per capita than in Kenya, but comparatively, we look cleaner, like what is happening with our waste. And it obviously intersects with human health in terms of where we put the waste and what we do with the waste. So part of what I want to do tonight is just give some context for all of the really helpful information that Megan has shared about the current status of sort of recycling in the United States. And I wanted to talk about the history of recycling in this country because we have a long one. And so prior to World War II, there's been a long history of sort of a culture of reusing items, right? And so there are many stories, for example, out of the Great Depression of manufacturers purposefully marketing their products as dual use. So metal biscuit boxes were marketed as something you could then reuse as lunch boxes, and flour sack companies found out that people who couldn't afford normal fabric were using the flour sacks as fabric for clothing, and they started printing them with fun patterns on them so that people didn't have the names of the flour companies on their clothes. There was also this history during the World War II of encouraging Americans to collect scrap metal or paper or cooking waste, and they sold recycling. So the collection of these goods is this very pro-American thing to do. There were also some super problematic racialized social messages that were tied to the recycling campaign. So these are some real ads from World War II area where you can see that they were encouraging people to salvage scrap metals to defeat the Japanese. And so it's important to remember that all of these movements happened in a historical context with all of the other things, right? All of the social issues of that era and economic issues of that era. And actually, recycling just as an industry has a very long and sort of dark racialized history to it. So following World War II, a lot of these industries had been built up during the wartime effort to supply resources to the production of metal, metal armor and so forth. And now we needed a place to put our stuff. And so post World War II, the plastics industry, the metal industry, everybody started to think about how could we create a market for our stuff, basically. And so there was this shift towards single-use items, especially single-use plastics. And people didn't really buy it at first. Like they thought, why would we want something that we then just throw out? It went kind of against the culture. And so people had to, companies had to train people and make it part of our culture that it was normal to purchase an item, use it once, and then throw it out. And they sold this as a matter of convenience. It allowed women in particular to go into the workforce and not spend all their time washing diapers. It allowed us to carry things and be more of a society of convenience. And so as we moved towards these single-use items, there was a whole lot of benefit that came in terms of just relieving the labor demands on certain groups in the population. But now we had a lot of stuff that we had to deal with in terms of waste. And because we didn't really have waste management strategies to deal with all these single-use items, trash started piling up everywhere, to the point that in the 60s and 70s, they started to have to run these public service campaigns to talk to people about like putting trash into trash bins and thinking about reusing items. So these are two sort of famous historic photographs. This one is a giant trash can that was placed near Times Square in New York City, saying every litter bug caught by the sanitation police flying squad gets a summons and a risk of $25 fine. And so they were saying, just drop it in the basket. It's helping keep New York clean. And then shortly after that, the Keep America Beautiful campaign started the Don't Be a Litter Bag. And some of you may have heard the little jingle that goes with the Don't Be a Litter Bag campaign. And the idea was like, don't throw your trash, you should put it in a trash can. The 1960s leading into the 1970s are considered sort of the green decades of environmental activism. And part of that was that there were all of these demonstrations across the United States that focused on the issue of all these throwaway containers. So the idea that all these single-use items were now polluting the environment. And the focus of these protests was to hold industry responsible for the proliferation of disposable items. They were concerned about the trash that it was creating in the landscape and the pollution from that, but they were also concerned about the depletion of natural resources that was happening as a result of just this consumer culture that was developing. And so one of the responses to this was the creation of early recycling centers. And these looked quite different than the recycling centers that Megan was just telling us about. These were small. They were run mostly by volunteers. They were run as nonprofits. The people that worked at them were doing this because they had sort of anti-establishment and anti-corporate motives. They were very much not profitable. And there was, for the employees that worked there, this was a mission of personal transformation and environmental consciousness raising. And so they didn't want this to be a business. They saw this as a way to sort of be one with nature and deal with this problem that had developed. In that context, the Keep America Beautiful campaign was started. And the Keep America Beautiful campaign is what started the modern day America Recycles Day that we still celebrate every year on November 15th. And their campaign, it was a coalition that was formed in the early 1950s by the public and corporate interests, including a bunch of bottle manufacturers, because bottlers were some of their first sort of disposable items that we started to throw away. And the public, in their effort to hold manufacturers responsible, had proposed a set of bottle laws that made it the company's responsibilities to clean up all of these bottles. And they were vehemently opposed to that. And so they very cleverly started a bunch of ads, including the Don't Be a Litter Bug ad. But they started this Crying Indian ad that I actually want to play for you. It's 1 minute long because some of you may remember it or have learned about it. And so I'm hoping I got my audio to share properly.
Some people have a deep, abiding respect for the natural beauty that was once this country. And some people don't. People start pollution. People can stop it.
So there's a couple of things I want to say about this ad because it's become quite controversial since then. Oopsies. So the first thing I wanted to say is that it's received a lot of controversy because why is it not pulling up? Well, because the actor that played in it was an Italian-American actor and was, taking the role of a Native American, and because it was all sort of essentializing what Native Americans feel. But the point of this commercial was to shift the blame, right? This was very strategic on the part of the bottle manufacturers. If they send the message that people start the pollution and people can stop it, now it's not their fault. It is the fault of the individual consumers who are lazy and who aren't, properly dealing with their waste. And so they framed this as an environmental issue, right? But they deflected attention away from industry. And they shifted the blame from corporations to consumers and to their individual action. And so since then, this mentality really has persisted in the way that we talk about environmentalism in the United States, and it conceals the role of industry in polluting the landscape. And it also perpetuated lots of really problematic tropes, as I mentioned, about Native Americans and environmentalism. And in particular, this ad was played by an Italian-American actor, not even a Native American. It also made it look like, Native Americans suddenly just appeared from this historic past in this modern day landscape. So we can get into the social politics of it a lot later. But the thing I want you to remember is that the whole purpose of this ad was to shift the blame to the consumer. Another really important aspect of sort of the waste management conversation that was going on in the 50s, 60s, and 70s was that there has been this really long history of waste disposal sites in the United States being situated in low-income areas, particularly where there are large proportions of people of color living. And when environmental groups started to get into conversations about whether we should be where and whether we should have recycling centers, it was mostly being promoted by sort of middle class environmentalists as a way of, reusing waste, generating energy, if we're talking about incinerators. And they were not necessarily the neighborhoods that were going to be impacted. And so this disparity in conversation gave way to the modern day environmental justice movement, where people of color were disproportionately affected by our waste management decisions, but weren't the ones who were making those decisions. So one last key thing sort of mentioned in the conversation leading up to sort of modern day recycling is the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, which was passed by the United States EPA in 1976. The EPA was still fairly new at that point in time. And they had noticed there were all sorts of problems with our landfills in terms of a lack of guidelines to make sure that they were, well lined and safe and not leaking all sorts of nasty stuff into our groundwater aquifers. And so the government published waste disposal guidelines. And because these were stricter, it precipitated a quote unquote landfill crisis. Not because we were short of land in the United States to put our waste, but because it made it harder to site new landfills in specific areas, particularly near dense populations. And so there's this particularly famous story about this barge called the Mobro Barge, where a businessman from Long Island saw an opportunity to buy up trash in Long Island and ship it down to North Carolina, where they had less strict waste management rules, and land was cheaper, so waste disposal was cheaper. And so the barge left Long Island, it made it down to North Carolina, and then when they went on to inspect the barge, they found a syringe on it, and they decided that it was contaminated waste. It was not, might contain human waste, and it was not safe to accept at that landfill. And so the barge was stuck. It couldn't go back to Long Island. Long Island didn't want their trash. It couldn't stay in North Carolina, and it literally spent 5 months circling the globe trying to find somewhere to dock to get rid of this waste. And so Greenpeace famously climbed on this barge at night and hung this giant sign that said, "Next time, try recycling." Because when they did finally find somewhere to park the barge, they climbed on, it was 90 to 95% office paper, which of course is something that is recyclable. So the EPA has sort of in early days published this hierarchy of integrated waste management, and they suggested this order of priority. First, people should reduce their waste production. Then they should recycle. Then they should move to waste combustion, and then they should landfill it. And so in response to this, in the 80s and 90s, states began passing all these mandatory laws to promote recycling or to require recycling. And thus began sort of the commodification of our trash. So lots of waste management companies began investing in the recycling industry, and it pulled the work away from nonprofits, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Like, we want waste to sort of move through our economy in an efficient way. There were all these mainstream environmental organizations that really strongly supported recycling, and they lobbied for the construction of recycling centers. In some ways, this was really great, right? Like, we were diverting waste from landfills, and in other ways, as I mentioned, it was problematic because we starting to see these recycling centers situated in places where people did not necessarily have a voice. And so the recycling industry in many ways just replicated the social impacts of the previous waste industry. A lot of these centers ended up in low-income neighborhoods of color. Oftentimes, especially initially, what you saw was that these centers employed workers of color in the manual labor aspect of the job, whereas white workers were employed in the management aspect. And then the tricky part when you start to look at these is, at a surface level, many of these communities of color wanted these facilities. Like, they were bidding on having these facilities built in their communities. And in particular, when I talk about this with my students, we get a lot of sort of pushback on this idea, but it's important to understand this was like the best of bad economic options for a lot of these areas. So did they want the waste? No, but they also needed employment opportunities. And so waste, like everything else, gets complicated into all of these aspects of our society. But one of the really important things I want you to take home is that recycling has had no impact on our waste consumption or on our consumption habits. So this chart shows per capita municipal solid waste generation in the United States from 1960 to 2018. And I would argue we are doing a much better job recycling our waste, but we're making so much more of it. And as Megan so clearly shared with us, there's limits to what can be recycled, especially as our packaging has evolved to be lighter and more convenient. The packaging has in some ways become less recyclable. And so recycling is not going to be the panacea that solves our waste problem. Because when we treat recycling as like the way that we deal with our waste, like the way, the main way, we are essentially asking the question, how can we change without changing? We've been asking, how can we have exactly the same lifestyle, maybe even more of a, quick consumer lifestyle without changing any of our habits? How can we produce the same amount of waste and continue to use single-use materials, but have it be better for the environment? And arguably the answer is we can't, right? Because we've been focusing primarily on this recycle question instead of this question of reuse and reduction. And so this gets to this question of whose responsibility is it to change? Because I certainly don't want to shame anyone in the audience or anyone really about waste. Like, is it our job to sort of stop buying stuff and make sure every single thing we buy is always in glass and is, or in paper and is always recyclable? No. But we have certainly seen this shift towards more reusable products. And so some of you may have used a reusable water bottle or plastic or metal straws, the durable plastic straws, or purchased, reusable bags to get your groceries home from the store. And these are all really helpful changes. And some people have taken this towards the extreme and tried to be part of the zero waste movement. The zero waste movement is this lifestyle where people try to eliminate all their trash. So they don't use plastic, they don't buy anything that has a wrapper, they don't produce garbage, they focus on buying only secondhand things or using reusable containers, they compost their food. And for people who are particularly hardcore about it, they'll try to get like a year's worth of trash or 2 years worth of trash into one mason jar. And so what I would say about the zero waste movement is that it turns these big systemic problems into questions of individual responsibility. And in some ways, it's therapeutic for those of us that care about the environment, but it really does not address the power or the politics or production decisions that go into actually creating all that waste in the first place. And I would also say that it's really hard to have a zero waste lifestyle, especially if you live in areas that don't have, co-ops where you can go refill all your containers, or if you can't buy in bulk so you don't have the individual packages. And so it's a movement that privileges middle and upper class lifestyles, and it tends to greenwash other negative environmental behaviors. And so it's hard to know which behavioral change matters the most if you're somebody who's trying to do the right thing, right? Like, I am not saying it is bad to use a reusable water bottle, but it's hard to know, like, is that more important, or is it more important that I drive less, or is it more important that I stop eating meat? Like, these are hard decisions to make. And this focus on consumer waste and putting the blame on consumers to reduce waste can really misplace the bigger blame for environmental issues. So some of you may have been aware of this massive campaign against plastic straws that was going around a few years ago. It started with this video that I'm not going to show because it's graphic of this sea turtle that was captured, and a vet pulled a plastic straw out of its nostril and there was blood going everywhere. And so it was framed as this conversation around sort of disposable plastic straws and like skip the straw, save a sea turtle. Lots of companies started pledging they were not going to use plastic straws. Starbucks redesigned a lot of their cups so that you didn't need a plastic straw in them anymore. And I think that it gave people the sense that plastic straws were a huge, huge issue in terms of ocean plastic. Plastic straws make up about 0.025% of ocean plastic, and about 60 to 80% of ocean plastic is from the fishing industry. So if you want to solve plastic in the ocean, like, please skip this plastic straw. I encourage you to do so. We do not need more plastic straws on the face of this planet. But we also need better regulations, right, to fix ocean plastic that's coming from the fishing industry. So, do individual choices matter at all? Well, yes, I would say that individual actions communicate urgency. Like they show people that you care about this issue, that it's a thing that people should be paying attention to and companies should be paying attention to. And it can spur broader institutional changes. You know, in reaction to people caring about plastic straws, Starbucks, which makes good or sells gajillions of plastic straws, changed their packaging to something that still has a lot of plastic, but that's another story. But it can communicate urgency around an issue, right? And I was at this talk recently with Naomi Klein, who's a really famous climate activist. We were talking about the idea of like giving up driving or giving up flying. And she said, you know, don't turn your life into a fetish object. And in some ways, like you don't need to be perfect to be part of the solution. And in some ways, the zero waste movement is fetishizing the idea of like a zero waste, like I'm not going to produce anything on this planet. And so you can certainly reduce your consumption and reduce the ways in which you engage with waste without needing to go, you know, all the way. But mostly what we need to do is to look for ways to aggregate our power and hold corporations responsible. So I'm not saying this to vilify any people or industries. The current system is working exactly as it was designed to work. So the fact that all this waste is being produced and corporations are creating like cutesy packaging that is not at all recycling, there's no checks in the system right now to keep them from doing that. It's working how it's supposed to. And in addition to that, legal responsibility to shareholders and their profits often keep corporations from changing their behavior to be more socially and environmentally sustainable. And so we have to change that system in which they operate if we want them to operate differently. And so how do you change the system? You do this with activism, with new policies and new laws that result in structural solutions. And so Europe has done this, sort of. So I'll give you an example. So in Europe, they have changed their recycling laws in a way that hold the companies that produce the waste responsible for getting rid of the waste. So in the United States, many of you may have bought something in this laminated plastic packaging. So like donuts sometimes come in this, muffins, also here we've got apples, these plastic films that are really not recyclable. They banned laminated plastic packaging in Europe, and a lot of companies have now switched to more recyclable packaging materials like cardboard. As a consumer, asking you to avoid packaging when that is the only type of packaging that a company uses is impossible. We need there to be different options for the consumer. So Europe in 2018 passed their packaging and, well, that says packaging and packaging waste directive. And it gives targets for companies that they have to meet in terms of recovering recycling. And it also talks about specific types of materials that are allowed to be used, that they have to minimize by volume and weight. And so companies have started redesigning their packaging so that it works better, so it's smaller and is easier to responsible. And so it does the exact opposite of what that crying Indian ad did. It now shifts the responsibility for waste management from the consumer back to the producer, where frankly it should have been. And then they're incentivized to choose more sustainable and reusable materials. And so since 2018, they've now added on to this, and they have this single-use plastic directive, things like plastic forks, and then a plastic bag directive at all, banning single-use plastic bags like we have in our grocery stores. And Europe is talking about their new recycling laws and policies as part of their big Green New Deal. So in order to meet the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement and to reduce carbon emissions, they want to create a circular economy where anything that is produced as packaging and has to contain recycled content, and it has to sort of create this closed loop system where it just keeps going through it. And so the goal is to make everything more sustainable and to empower consumers and public buyers to be part of this closed circular packaging and circular economy. It's not without its challenges. Like, I don't want to paint it as if Europe is there and we are not, because they still are figuring this out. It's a relatively new shift in their policy, and there's still issues with consumers. So I'll just talk about cans because it's easy. So in the grand scheme of things, recycling aluminum cans is pretty energy efficient relative to like mining the ore and producing the can. But when people throw away the cans, then inherently they're not getting into a circular system, right? And so recycling rates are problematic. And it's on average about 25% of cans that are produced and put into the system are lost because people are throwing them away in Europe, and it varies by country. In the US, it's more than 50% lost. Now, some states like California and Michigan and a handful of others have bottle deposits. And so you collect all, I used to live in Michigan for graduate school. So we would collect all our cans, you go to the grocery store, you feed it into a machine, and it spits out a receipt with how much money you got from all of your cans, and then you would cash it in or use it to buy groceries. And so people would very much like save their cans to get the money back. And so recycling rates are higher in areas with bottle deposits. One of the things that's being talked about in the context of creating circular economies is that we have this opportunity as we sort of like re-envision how the world needs to work to center humans in this conversation and to center environmental justice in this conversation about supply streams. So one quick example that I wanted to share is First Mile Coalition, which is a nonprofit organization that's collaborating with a bunch of companies, including HP Inc. And they're working in 3 companies right now, Haiti, Honduras, and Taiwan, and they hire local people to collect plastic that might have otherwise made it into the ocean stream. So oftentimes they're collecting from beaches or from river outlets or from streets. And the idea is to divert plastic that would have been ocean waste, and they convert it into recycled ink cartridges. And part of their mission in hiring these people is to pay a fair and livable wage, to provide people healthcare, and to provide access to schooling. And a lot of the people that they're hiring are actually kids who are not in school because their families need them to be working to earn money. And so the goal is eventually to get those kids back into school because they're paying a livable wage to the families. So is this an end-all be-all solution? No, but it's an example of the ways in which we need to think about people's livelihoods as part of a conversation about consumption and waste. So, how do we rethink recycling? We frankly need to rethink consumerism. We need to think a lot of our environmental regulations, and we really do need to rethink how we as a society value our stuff. And so I would argue we actually need to become more materialistic people. And I don't mean that in the sense that we need to like love money and love things, but I mean it in the sense we need to literally value the materials that our things are made out of. We need to buy quality goods that are not going to just break and we need, throw away. And we need to focus on things like reusing things or reducing and repairing rather than just recycling. And this, in addition to being really good for the earth, you save money when you're not constantly buying and throwing away things. So it's good for your finances as well. I certainly don't want to paint the idea that individual choices don't matter, because they do matter. It matters a lot how much you consume. And so you should consume less. You should reuse and repair more. And you should recycle everything you can. And bless Megan and people in this world that are helping us recycle all of our stuff, because some of it is inevitable, needs to be recycled. But I hope that you take home from this that structural changes matter more. And so it matters tremendously who we vote for and how much we put pressure on companies and politicians to create better incentives for producing and collecting goods that have materials that can be reused and recycled. And it matters that we educate each other. And most importantly, we need to sort of restructure how we incentivize our economy to be based on better environmental practices. So thinking about all this environmental stuff can be kind of depressing. And I certainly don't want to leave you on a note where you're sort of feeling like there's all this work to be done, because there is, but I'm still hopeful. I have 2 young children and I need to be hopeful in the face of all of this. And also I teach all these really incredible young people as a professor at NIU, and man, they are cool people. There's this shift in young people that are now coming into the university. And I think that they have seen that their generation is one that's facing this sort of existential threat, this generational threat in terms of social and environmental crises. And they're not buying excuses. They are ready to take on everything. They have no fear about issues being too big or too intersectional. And they're ready to be pragmatic and to pivot and focus on getting changes done and not just, banter about in terms of politics. And so I I hope that all of you leave this talk in terms of rethinking recycling with a message of hope that we have a lot of hard work just as a society to do in terms of all the environmental crises we're facing. But we should also be hopeful that there is a way forward. All right, I am going to stop sharing my screen because I know it's a little after 7, so I assume we can go to Q&A.
Well, I'm going to give Megan just a few minutes to summarize her talk. And I wanted to say that I'm very encouraged by young people as well. I think that I have seen and heard from young people, and I think we can be encouraged about that. And I think we'll probably talk about some of those things in our discussion. But in the meantime, Megan, can you come on and summarize your talk?
Yes, I just unmuted myself, and I am hesitant to show my slides again because I'm afraid I'll disconnect us, but maybe I'll leave my video off and try it here. But I just want to piggyback, since I'm coming in after Courtney's and summary, when she left off with the phrase about recycling what we can. That's really where I was leading off with this, is given all of the changes between China, between COVID, between where we are with, just recycling in general and wanting to make certain that we can maintain that process. We want to make certain that we know how to recycle, or at least how to find the answers to what we're going to recycle. So I'm going to try this against my better judgment and see if I can share this picture. But what we want everybody to know, whether or not Waste Management is your recycler, we want you to know to actually go to your hauler, go to your provider, actually know your program. What we've been trying to do as an industry, put more pictures out there, get back to categories, not have endless lists of 373 items that you could potentially recycle. If you have something in your hand, you can find it in the picture in under 5 seconds. If it's clean, it's empty, it's relatively dry, recycle it. Don't overthink it. If you've stared at something in your hand for going on 37 seconds and you just don't know, you're probably thinking too hard about it, and it's probably not designed to go into your recycling bin because it's just too complex at that point in time. So whatever we can do to help get back to basics for a lot of the stuff that we make and use consistently every single day that's going to be durable enough to recycle, that's really what we want to focus on. And at the very least, at the end of the day, if you get to the point that you just don't know, you can usually tell if something that you're going to try to recycle can be recycled based on the type of container that you're putting it into. If you are doing what your haulers have called for, any sort of loose loading, if you know that yourself, maybe you share containers with your neighbors. It's like sometimes it's single family, sometimes it's multifamily. But if you open a toter, there's no bags. You can clearly identify bottles and papers and cans. Generally, we're going to pick that up as a company. We're going to recycle it. Compare it to maybe eating in a common area dining hall where you're looking at a bin and it's labeled recycling, and you happen to go toss in what you think is recycling, and you peer in. And if your first thought is gross, ew, that looks like a pile of garbage, probably is gross, ew, and looks like a pile of garbage. So it's just one of those things we want people to be aware of it. If it looks too dirty, if it doesn't look like something that was really designed to be recycled, or somebody just started tossing the wrong thing in and everybody else in the room played follow the leader, you're probably not practicing the best recycling. You might want to put that plastic bottle in your bag, take it home, throw it in your own toter where it's going to stay clean and dry, and it has a chance to get to the end of the line. But it's basically about making certain that, as the packaging changes, as things become lighter, as it becomes more evolved, as more things are coming in bags, as things get to really the individual serving size, that's where we want to question, does every individual serving size, was it really designed to be recycled? This picture here is one of my favorites because 95% of this cold case, if it was rinsed out, dry, empty, could easily be picked up by us 7 days a week, go straight to a recycling plant, be sorted with minimal muss or fuss. But it's that one row in there of a million different materials, a million little pieces of food, and things that are too small that hit that residual residue size that kind of throw us for a loop. So it goes back to even what Courtney was saying about this push towards individual consumerism, consumption, tiny, the stuff that we buy all the time, not thinking about it. All of these things that are small and disposable were not necessarily designed for recycling at the end of the line. So if we can keep it clean, keep it consistent, usually it's something that we can take in and we can advertise and we can continue to recycle and do our best as a company. I'm not going to focus too much on this slide anymore. But again, the other thing that I want to throw out there is I get so many questions emailed to me every single day out of every single week. Megan, what about this widget? What about this thingamaboo? What about this random piece of plastic that I really can't identify? The one thing that I like to stress is us and the rest of the recyclers, we haven't really forgotten anything when we put something on a sign. I'll throw NIU out there. If you're at NIU and you're in the dining hall, if you see a piece of signage up that has 5 or 6 big categories in there, that's what we want you to make certain is clean and empty when we put it into the bin. We get so many people wish cycling who have a piece of plastic, who have a napkin, who have a used paper towel, and they think, I guess it's paper, I'm gonna try to recycle this. If you don't see it on the sign, it's always best to assume that it's not necessarily something that was meant to be recycled. Maybe it can be composted, maybe it can go someplace else, but we never want to default to the recycling bin because recycling is a very specific process. And if it's on the sign, we know what to do with it when it comes in. And the very last thing that I wanted to show, kind of piggybacking on Courtney's message of hope there, is that we actually do get clean recycling in, I swear. So as we're doing all of this work to try to reduce, the contamination that comes in, we have the ability to collect clean recycling, to clean routes. And when we come in, again, we never expect perfection. We've set our own contamination rates at 10% because it's almost impossible. But when you look at a pile like this, about 4.5 tons of material, and you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 plastic bags of material and everything else is just loose and sitting there, that's perfect. That's exactly what we want to see. We can find the residue, we can get it off the stream. None of that paper is wet, none of it's soggy, none of it's saturated with food. We can put that right into a bale, get it out the door, get it to the person that we're selling it to so they can put it back into the stream. It's not impossible. It just means getting the material in the way that we ask for it initially, rather than mixing it with all the garbage materials. And the last thing that I want to leave you with is when in doubt, throw it out. I'd rather lose it one time than have garbage continually going into the bin, but then find out. So maybe WM isn't your hauler, but you spend your days and nights working at NIU. This is a perfect example of how different groups, different municipalities, different colleges, everybody who has a dedicated recycling program usually has a way to find out about it. So take a moment. NIU has a sustainability page that talks about all the different ways they recycle, how you actually manage the different waste streams, because again, not everything is single stream recycling. But once you put these systems into place, if we use the systems properly, we can keep these materials out of the landfill and keep it from impacting our environment in the best way possible. So now we're definitely over the 7 o'clock mark. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen if I can manage it. And that way we can go back into the Q&A for sure.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you, Courtney. We're going to now give everyone a few minutes to refresh their drinks and write in some questions and comments in the Q&A. We're using the Q&A for the questions, and then I will read the questions and the speakers will respond verbally. Some of you may want to ask your question directly of the speaker. We have never done this at a virtual STEM Cafe before, but tonight we're going to give it a try for a short time. So you will need to raise your hand. You can also use the Q&A, so I'm going to be looking back and forth. But you could raise your hand and I will watch the hand raising, and then you could go ahead and ask your question directly. We will I will ask them to turn your mic on, and then we will immediately turn it off once you ask your questions. So we're going to give it a shot tonight. So while we're waiting for people to write in their questions and get their drinks, I just wanted to remind people about our next STEM Cafe, which is Fueling the Future with Renewable Energy, May 12th, with Dr. Tao Xu, NIU Presidential Research Professor in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry. He will be our speaker for that cafe. And I do also want to remind you that we have teen STEM cafes now. And our next one is going to be May 8th, and our topic is Machines That Learn, Understanding Robotics, Machine Learning, and Artificial Intelligence. And we actually have 3 speakers from campus that are going to be involved. Dr. Butel, Dr. Tan, and Dr. Gunkel will be talking to us, talking to the teens. And they can register at go.niu.edu /Teen Cafe AI. And, you know, if you forget that or something, you can always email me and I'll get you the information to share with teens. Our next, by the way, our teen cafes are in partnership with the DeKalb Public Library. So, and teens really are able to develop their leadership skills if they become teen leaders, and they actually manage the event with our support. So it's pretty cool. And don't forget, we have that survey in our chat. We really value your feedback and would appreciate any suggestions you have. And as I mentioned, this STEM Cafe was a suggestion from the audience. Courtney, did you check the chat for Becky's message? And so I think we're ready to start that conversation. I think people must have been able to put in their questions, so we're going to begin the discussion right now. Okay. So our first question here, Courtney and Megan, just you can put your hand up or whatever, whoever thinks they're wanting to answer the question. Is Waste Management partnering with any firms who are taking waste and converting to biofuels? I think that was a question for Megan, actually.
I want to say short answer, yes, but it's probably more at the investment level from us. So what we've been doing actually, short of biofuels as the sort of the key driver, is we've been retrofitting a lot of our landfills the last couple of years, last decade or so, to actually do compressed landfill gas and compressed natural gases. And so a lot of our investments have kind of gone that route in terms of trying to make our own operations a little bit more efficient and make a secondary environmental benefit from that. I do know our sustainability report online is going to have actual disclosures of different companies and industries that we invest in. In terms of locally, I wouldn't say that there's anything that I can think of here in the Illinois region where we're doing that sort of direct partnership with, but on an investment level, I'm sure that it's out there.
And Courtney is asking whether straws are recyclable.
So when it comes to the actual single stream bin, no, straws fall into the residuals category. However, when it comes to individual programs, there's sometimes a lot of mailback programs out there. So if you Google something like straw recycling, you might find a third-party company, TerraCycle is one of those that come to mind, that their entire recycling system is different and that it's 100% mailback. So they might actually have something that they could do with things like straws and coffee stirrers and some of those smaller plastics that are too small to capture in single stream, but might be able to be more sorted in a more detailed, minute fashion.
Thank you. This person has a question, I think it's Robin. Why so much number 6 plastic is still used when it's not normally been taken for recycling? And what can consumers do to influence the use of number 6 plastics?
Well, the reason it's still prevalent is that it's inexpensive. And so the thing that I always kind of tread the fine line on is I hate to vilify inanimate objects, because anything that's currently designed was designed to meet a manufacturing spec for a set of standards by a group of humans. So somebody needed a material that was going to be lightweight, low cost to transport from point A to point B, didn't need to necessarily be particularly durable because it was going to be used for a very short amount of time. And because it was low cost, if it was going to be used in something like the restaurant industry where somebody's going to hold food in it for 20 minutes or less, depending on feedstock, you didn't have to have the strongest, most expensive, most durable type of plastic out there to do it. So you were able to use this grade of plastic that was a little bit more brittle, maybe more prone to falling apart in direct sunlight under more rapid circumstances. But it was something that was initially designed, I think, with landfill in mind, not necessarily designed with recoverability and recyclability in mind. So it's one of the reasons that, you know, it's out there because unfortunately, there's still a market for it. We haven't put anything into a ban in practice in the United States that says we don't like number 6. And therefore, as long as people are able to purchase it and provide it, there's going to be an end market for it. And if there's an end market and we don't have a way to take it back, then it unfortunately goes into a landfill. Having said that, I know the companies that put it out there, a lot of them are trying to work with various take back programs, again, their own mail back, their own sort of dumpster drop off programs. But again, it's one of those drops in the buckets compared to the number of ways that number 6 is used in the long run. So I would say, you know, this probably isn't the best case scenario, but again, big picture, folks can, you know, get involved with environmental issues like what Courtney was talking about. Who are we electing? You know, what sort of standards, what sort of promotions do they want to put out there? But also on an individual choice, you know, if we don't go to the restaurant that's providing, you know, material X, but we go to the restaurant that's providing material Y. The other part with that I hesitate to go forth on is that a lot of what we talked about, I'm not asking for a lot of disposables from the restaurant industry right now. You know, I could sit there and do this at any restaurant that provides something in styrofoam, but I'm also not asking for the clamshell that's made of number 1 or the clamshell that's made of number 5. Because when we see all those clamshells on the line coming at us 10 to 20 miles an hour on a belt, and we don't know how clean, how dirty something is, we don't have the ability to hold something up and say good versus bad, and how clean is this without letting all those other clamshells get by us, it's kind of almost moot at that point. And I think that kind of goes back to that individual consumer question as well, where if we're making it, what's the best way to dispose of it, you know? And we don't want to say, well, this is evil and this isn't based on this idea of guilt or consumption. We purchased this, this is what it came in. Disposing of it is probably a bigger picture question in the long run. And I'm going to trail off in case Courtney wants to piggyback onto that. In case I missed it.
No, you hit on all the points I was going to make. Just that, like, the fact that number 6 plastic exists and being used is an example of the system working the way that it's currently designed in terms of incentives. And if we want it to not be used, we really need to regulate its use and say that we're not going to allow number 6 plastic, and they will shift to using other products.
Yep.
And Cindy wonders, what is Waste Management's marketing strategy to educate and re-educate the public? The last time she received recycling updates was in the late 1980s.
So that's a very layered question as well. So in terms of our strategy, it's kind of been happening on a lot of different levels because, as I said at the beginning of the talk, everybody's our customer. Anybody who is a private customer has gotten a lot of this education already. They've gotten it in the form of mailers when we were being nice back in 2017, and fines and slaps on the hands in 2018 when we still saw materials coming in plastic bags. And then if they needed retraining, they had somebody like me come out or their account reps to physically talk one-on-one with humans to try to get them to understand like what they're putting in the bin isn't allowed there. When it comes to somebody who's our municipal customers, we might be your hauler, but we might actually be working through a municipality. And in that case, right now for our, I want to make certain I get these stats right, so bear with me. But for anybody who's works with our municipality, our government sector, sometimes we're not allowed to directly contact the customer. In that case, the city of is our customer. And so we do as much as possible with communicating with them, but then we rely on the cities to be the people that do the trickle down in terms of our folks that are putting stuff into the bin. So it's not the best answer. And I want to say that we're at probably about 50% transition since we started in 2017 with reaching out to all of our sort sort of residential municipal contract holders on that point to get sort of the recycle right messaging out there and to work with them to promote it. I want to say one of our bigger success stories has been City of Elgin in the last few years, because we have a transfer station there, and they've been great partners with trying to get the contamination messaging out there. But a lot of it is kind of one-on-one working with the cities to say, what is the city and WM's communication strategy going to be moving forward, so we can educate the 30,000, 40,000, 100,000 homes that we might pick up in an area. So it's not something that happens easily or overnight, but it's something that we're actively engaged in right now.
Becky, can you activate Emily? I can't. So she can ask her question. Okay.
Why do people litter?
Hi, Clara.
That is a great question that I don't have the answer to. I wish I did. At the very least, even if you can't get to a recycling bin, there's usually a garbage can right there, and garbage is always preferable to littering. But I'm not certain what the answer is, what the motivations are for some folks to throw something on the ground if they have a proper way to dispose of it. Sorry, I wish I knew that. 10 years on the job, and I don't know the answer to that one yet.
Well, and I also, Megan and I were chatting about this yesterday about, I think it was with you, could have been with a student, about how unfortunately environmentalism has become so politicized in this country that some people purposefully don't recycle and purposefully litter because it's become tied to their identity of like not caring. And that is another problem to tackle.
Oh,
here's a question from Emily. Given all the contamination difficulties posed by single stream, does it really make sense? My understanding is that many European countries are successfully recycling a large percentage of waste and doing so via sorted recycling.
Yep. So what the European countries do, Japan, that's what we term source separated recycling. So your cardboard goes here and your paper goes here and your glass goes there. I think in the US, it started a single stream. In the early days, there was more source separated, but back in the 80s and 90s, what used to come out of things like the grocery store, the convenience store, a lot of that packaging was a lot more consistent. It was very easy for a municipality to work with a hauler and say, we're going to put all of your newspaper into this paper grocery bag, and we're going to put it in this tub. And we're going to ask you to take another paper grocery bag, which you're getting every week when you go to the store, because there were no plastic grocery bags at that point. And we want you to put all your glass bottles and jars in here. And then if you have aluminum, we're going to ask you to do the same. And that's it, by the way, because that's all you're making, very little cardboard. There was no Amazon.com. There was no e-commerce at that point in time. As things started shifting to more that consumer-centric focus of everything being one-off, being disposable, people knew that they liked recycling because they weren't making garbage. And I think the questions became, how do we recycle more? And the easy answer was bigger containers. And if we were going to have bigger containers, we weren't going to have room in our homes or our apartments for each of us to have 5 giant containers on site. So how do we get this picked up more efficiently? And a lot of that was also coming back. I know municipalities, they were like, we don't want heavy machine trucks on our roads 7 days out of the week. What about our infrastructure? What about this? We don't want to be picking up garbage. We don't want litter if a storm comes through. So I think at the time, single stream seemed like a really elegant solution to this problem, because everything we're getting is clean and it's all consistent materials. So if we mix it together, we can pick it up and we're good to go. The big change has been that shift to the contamination and all these garbage and this different packaging that we're getting, because now the recycling container looks very similar to the garbage can, and it's really easy for folks to get confused. I know in 2017, a few municipalities kind of tried to go back to what we call the dual stream recycling in the city, where they were like, we're going to give everybody 2 toters, and we want you to put your cardboard in one and your bottles and cans in the other. And that's how we're going to address it. And what they were finding is that a lot of the bad practices that folks have sort of adopted too over the years of, I'm not going to break down my box. I'm not going to empty this foam or this plastic packaging out of here, or all these little residuals. The same thing was happening. It was just all going into the cardboard container versus being mixed together. So you still had a contaminated cardboard stream and potentially a contaminated bottle and can stream coming in. So source separation separating alone without the education in front of it first. I personally think that we probably are going to get back to something like that in the future, just depending on how contamination happens. But in the meantime, the education to get in front of the contamination needs to happen first, no matter what you do, because just putting more bins out there won't necessarily stop sort of that interpretive wish cycling of a lot of these different materials coming in.
And Courtney, does recycling contribute to attainment of Paris goals or take away from them?
That is a complicated question. So for those who are not familiar,
Take it, Courtney.
So the Paris Climate Agreement is, of course, this global agreement wherein countries pledge to reduce carbon emissions so that we can hold global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And so it's different than other treaties in the sense that it's not like a percent reduction. Countries just make commitments to try to do so. And so the question basically is like, does recycling allow us to reduce our carbon emissions? And for that, I would say it's complicated because it depends on the life cycle of said item, right? And that's where I'm going to go nod and make Megan talk about this.
Yeah.
Because some items are far more recyclable than others, and you also have to deal with loss to the system and all of the sorting and separation and all that.
And I just to pick up on that, I know some of the different life cycle analysis studies that, you know, we've done as a company in terms of what we collect and what we do. One of the positives of that is that with all the materials staying in North America, recycling is kind of regaining this regionality of focus where people just can't think, I can just put this on a boat and it's going to go away somewhere. And now we're not factoring in, you know, transportation and emissions of long overseas voyages back and forth. And a lot of it's gone down to, you know, what can I do within 200 miles, 300 miles, 500 miles? It makes trying to capture those emissions a lot more relevant. And internally, in terms of our own recycling goals, and I'm going to defer back to our sustainability report that we do, our own group does a lot of sort of metrics capturing where we've kind of reworked our own recycling goals to be in alignment with carbon emissions and GRI reporting goals as well. So that way we can not only take the tons of what we capture, but factor that into our different facilities around the country and actually try to quantify that in sort of the marketing and the information that we put out there for people. Our general short answer consensus is that yes, if we can at least do some energy recapture on what we're bringing in, especially on high energy production, things like plastic and aluminum, that we're definitely going to see the benefit back from that. Because when you're looking at smelting or petroleum manipulation, there's an sort of apples to apples benefit that's going to come from trying to get any amount of that energy back. And especially as we adjust our fleets, as we're like transitioning out of diesel and going to clean fuel vehicles and electric vehicles, these sorts of things are going to go hand in hand company-wise, and recycling is going to become sort of a bit and component of that, because we're also not looking at recycling isolated. We're looking at what happens as we're moving landfill materials, or if we're third-partying materials to other waste hauling sites. You know, maybe somebody in Indiana that's doing, you know, cleaner incineration versus some of the old school things. All of that's being factored in together as part of the solid waste puzzle, rather than just recycling on its own.
And Scott is saying that few restaurants and bars recycle because it is cheaper and easier not to. We need to have more incentive, maybe regulations to have them recycle.
I think a lot of that actually, it is to a certain degree regulation. So especially in the state of Illinois, there's, you know, some general legislation that says we want in the state everybody to divert at least 50%. A lot of the municipalities have their own goals and things that they require. So if an inspector shows up and you have just a garbage can behind your bar and you don't have a recycling bin, that's going to be an immediate ticket and saying you're not in compliance with the city's regulation from that. Now, having said that, you know, working with bars, restaurants, from the municipal standpoint, a lot of that still ends up being education. If you go restaurant where you might have the potential for a higher degree of transient employee, somebody who's going to work for a few months and move in and move out, there's still the education and training component of that to make certain we're getting what we want, that we're getting it loose. But definitely one of the things that we're trying to do, it feels opposite, but with sort of the penalties for the contamination, we're trying to maintain that economic incentive, if that makes any sense whatsoever. If somebody comes to us and they say, well, I used to recycle because it was cheaper, and we say, well, you had a recycling bin that was cheaper, but your recycling bin was constantly full of garbage. But for years, because our contracts didn't allow it, we wouldn't penalize people for it. So the bad behavior continued. Now we're just flat out telling people, hey, if you make us send a garbage truck to pick up this recycling bin, you're going to pay for that extra trip charge to your building. So if you want to maintain or lower your business operating costs, follow the rules and only put what we ask you to put in there and get stuff into the right bin. So it's kind of been, it's always an unpleasant conversation at first to talk about the money component of it. But when you can kind of talk in dollar terms, especially to business owners, I think they start to get it. And they realize like, oh, I don't have 2 garbage bins. One of them just happens to be cheaper than the garbage bin next to it. And you can kind of tweak that and incentivize their own managers to know what's going on, and so as their own people to keep an eye on a bin. And then you do have people that will pick up on it and continue to recycle and continue to divert. Absolutely.
And you might be interested, the audience might be interested to know what our poll results were. We asked who knows who their recycling and garbage hauler is, and 84% of our audience actually did.
All right.
And who has ever observed a contamination sticker on the recycling bin before, and 90% said no. So that's
What?
good.
Oh no. That either
that's
means
good,
you're all
right?
fantastic recyclers, or we haven't been allowed to start ticketing you yet. So keep it.
Let's
Yeah.
be
And-
ignorant, pretend we're all good at this.
Yeah.
45% of our audience said that straws should be recycled. And when I was getting this talk together, I happened to walk past a big garbage receptacle at the university and saw a big sign on it that said garbage. And there was a big pizza box or something in there with lots of grease on. So I thought that was interesting. So, but it was good because we could only learn by seeing that.
Yeah,
Okay, so,
absolutely.
oh my
Absolutely.
gosh, you know, that was garbage and why, and so then to rethink about that. Anyway, so we have another question here. Where is the new MRF in the Chicago area? There
It's-
was one on the south side of Chicago and one in a northern suburb. I
Yep.
think.
So the new one is actually in Hotchkiss, Illinois. And the one that was on the south side of Chicago, that was at the near the old Countryside landfill down there. That one had a really bad fire a couple of years ago. I kind of mentioned we get a lot of flammable things that come in. And so we had that one sort of limping along on cardboard only for a while. We were diverting a lot of single stream up to our Grays Lake location. The one in Hotchkiss that we just opened, we are affectionately calling it the MRF of the future, because that's sort of our new testing ground for a lot of these robotics optical sorters that we want to put into place, that we've started integrating into some of our older facilities. And what we've done at the Grays Lake site is we've actually changed that into a transfer station for recycling. So a lot of that northern material, everything that we're trying to do via transfer stations in the city, south side around Matson, Cicero, we're trying to get everything to this MRF of the future, because it's actually designed to help make a cleaner end product from some of these dirtier streams that are coming in. So while that doesn't mean throw anything you want into the bin, because we still need that contamination under 10%, we're able to finesse a lot more of what comes out because of the level of robotics and automation and sorters that we're testing out. So a lot of stuff from a lot of the European countries that do a lot of their sorting and this and that, but that was sort of our pilot one. And then the one in Salt Lake City that we just opened has a lot of this new equipment and technology as well that we're running. So it's all part and parcel to trying to make certain we get as much volume as possible to the best facility that we happen to own locally. And we're very excited about it. Having said that, it got to full up capacity once COVID hit. So they haven't let me in the door to fawn over all of the new equipment yet, but I'm looking forward to getting back there when we're allowed to go back to the office.
And do they ever give tours of these facilities? Because it may be more, people may be more motivated if they
Yep.
actually saw the process.
So we're actually part of that facility that was supposed to be part of the production was an education center. And because of COVID, that piece just sort of stopped because we were just allowing sort of essential workers in the door for the better part of a year. So as things start to lighten up, as we start to get everybody on that site vaccinated, we're hoping construction will resume. And that way we'll have an education center where we can actually schedule tours and allow visitors to see what's happening on the plant floor when they come in. So stay tuned for that. It's always worthwhile to poke at one of us and ask, because when that's up and running, it's always great for us to be like, yeah, call so-and-so over there and they'll hook you up. So.
Well, here's a question. I've been wondering the same thing. When we throw out a plastic bottle, should we leave the top on?
Yes. So the plastics industry itself has been trying to do a lot of promotion on this, but I mentioned that we stopped exporting our plastics about 5 years ago. Most of the plastics processors in the United States, the equipment that they use, they do what we call a grind on the plastic. The processors that buy from us know they're getting a post-consumer material. So there's going to be an Aquafina bottle next to a Polar Springs bottle, next to a Fiji bottle. This is all going to be different labels, different types of glues, but all relatively good structural bottles. So everybody who takes a cap off to throw it away rarely takes off the little ring on that cap, pulls the label off, cuts the glue off the back of it. We're already getting a mixed material, whether or not that cap is on there. So we've been encouraging people to leave that cap on, because when it goes through that grind, there's different float tests that are available to the plastics where number one will sink, number two will float. This type of residue will actually be captured out. So it's not that any bottle that ever got recycled without a cap didn't get recycled, but if you put that cap on, you now have the opportunity to get more of your plastic through the recycling line and get it recycled at the end of the day. So it's also one of those things too, just from a fun nerd perspective, as hopefully I didn't cut off when we were talking about lightweighting of materials, but as things have gotten lighter, it's easier for things to lose their shape on the line. If you trap a little bit of that air by leaving the cap on, it holds that three-dimensional shape. We want that bottle to be three-dimensional compared to that paper, because it helps it get where it needs to go at the end of the line.
And this person has a comment about the use of glass cullet in bottle manufacturing. Manufacturing actually saves energy and saves machinery because it melts at a lower temperature.
Yes, yes.
All right. And this person is asking all the same questions that I want to know. Are there numbers? There are numbers on the plastic containers. Which numbers can be recycled?
The numbers that can be recycled are basically 1, 2, 4, and 5 if they match the shape and size of what you see on the pictures. So the looks of those bottles, those margarine tubs, those kind of sturdy bowls that we get off the grocery store shelf will trump any number that you see, because the plastics that we're afraid of, the number 6s and the number 7s, typically aren't used to make those products. They're not durable enough. They're never going to take manufacturing from a plant down in Alabama, 3 road trips, a train trip, a box truck to get to a grocery store, and then home in your car. If it was a styrofoam type of product material, it's not going to hold up to that. Therefore, it's not used in the manufacturing. So we always want people to be going back to looking at those photos. The numbers are something we're trying to get away from too. We spent so many times saying, 1 through 5 and 7. 7 in the plastics industry means other. So whenever there's a brand new resin out there, something like the compostable or the biodegradable resins that have come online, they just throw it under the 7 category, and the 7s tend to make a little bit of a mess for us because it's really inconsistent. When we get 6s and 7s in, they end up in mixed plastic bales, and they kind of reduce the value of that bale because we have more of those trace materials that may or may not be as recyclable that we're trying to sell at the end of the line. Number 3 always ended up on that list. I never understood it because number 3 is PVC. You're not going to have a water bottle made out of PVC anytime soon. So we really, as an industry, are trying to get away from the numbers. At some point, if you're holding a water bottle, a soda bottle, a milk jug, laundry detergent, dish soap bottle, you're good to go. You really don't have to overthink it too much and stare at that number.
Okay, and for clarification, if you have a glass bottle and you have a plastic lid, should you keep it on? Or does it make a difference if it's a plastic cap in a plastic bottle, or does it make a difference?
I leave all the lids on myself. We break the bottles when they come to us on the line intentionally. So I kind of look at it the same way as you could have a glass beverage bottle and it could still have a paper liner on it. And that paper liner is probably, if it's glued on enough, is going to end up as a trace material in that cullet anyway. I like screwing the lid on because it makes the bottle stronger for transportation. If you have that little bit of air in a glass bottle or a jar and you make that 4-point connection on top of it, it makes it stronger for transportation. Some of the really durable stuff that we take, like the wine bottles, they never break in transit. There's enough fluff in those trucks with all the Amazon cardboard that we pick up that they don't break. They're still wine bottles at the end of the line when they get to us. But I leave the lids on. So if you take the lids off, it's not wrong, but I leave the lids on.
And this is just a comment. Ever since I saw that label on that bin that said it was garbage because it was contaminated, I almost wash my recyclables as good as my dishes because
Yeah.
I am so um, paranoid that I'm going to have something contaminated in the recycling bin. So anyway, I'm sure everybody else isn't insane like me. What are
I
your
am.
thoughts? What are your thoughts about electronic waste? We got a question here about that.
Electronic waste is the sort of new frontier.
Yep.
It's coming at us fast and furious. We really need to keep it out of the landfills. It's got a million components, a million chemicals. It's got circuitry board. It's got valuable minerals and materials and gold and things that we absolutely don't want. When it comes to us in the single stream bins, it's dangerous to us. If it gets on a line and we don't capture it and it shatters it, like a lot of, if anybody's ever dropped your iPhone and you see that screen shatter, those acrylic shards for us act like glass shards on the line, and it's unpleasant and it's dangerous for us when it comes in. So whenever you have the opportunity for an electronic waste take back, if you work for a company that does asset tagging and they say drop your e-waste off here, always take advantage of it. There's definitely outlets for it, but you want to make certain that you're going through something certified and reputable, so that material isn't getting shipped overseas. It's not becoming somebody else's problem. They're following the Rios and the R2 standards, and I'm probably talking over Courtney here on this one, but definitely use e-waste recycling programs whenever possible. Don't put it in the landfill. It's actually illegal to put e-waste in the landfill in the state of Illinois.
So just one thing to follow up to Megan's comment about going with a certified recycling program as opposed to just.
Yep.
It's really hard to recycle electronic waste, as Megan has explained. And so there have historically been lots of programs that have just shipped waste overseas. China has been a big place that it's been shipped, but also West Africa accepts a lot of our e-waste. And the problem is that there's almost no environmental regulations there that govern the processing of e-waste. And e-waste is often there processed in open air markets, basically, where people are just doing it by hand. They have no protective gear. They're trying to strip it of the valuable minerals. It's often children involved in the process of this. People get cancer, and acid poisoning. It is horrible, and it is contaminating their environments. And that is, I guess what I want to say there is, like, there is a genuine human and environmental cost every time we upgrade our computer or upgrade our iPhone. And I think that that's where we need to think about the reuse and reduction part of the waste equation much more than recycling. Like, just because you can recycle something doesn't mean that you should be upgrading and recycling it in the first place.
Fun story with that. I just got yelled at by my boss for not upgrading my old work phone, which is a Kyocera. This thing is like 10 pounds, and I've had to strip half the apps off of it because it has no processing space on it anymore. I won't get rid of it because I'm that crazy person, Judy. Like, it's just, this is what it is. I'm like, until the day this doesn't turn on, I am not upgrading my work phone, and it's just who I am. So yeah, it's e-waste is a thing for sure.
Yeah.
We could have
part of our consumer culture right now.
Yes.
We could have a conversation just about that.
We could have a whole event on
yes.
Here, this person has a question about where does the recycled material and decal go to become made into new products? So does it happen at Waste Management or at a different facility? Where does this recycled material go to become made into new products?
That's a great question. I mean, let's just assume that a transfer station is going to bring it to our plant down at Hodgkins that we would be sorting, because a lot of the recyclers, we use each other's facilities as well. If we've got, a recycling center that's 2 miles up the road versus 50 miles away, it tends to be dropped off, but I'm going to pretend it made it to Hodgkins. Everything that we sort and that we sell we're going to try to first keep it as close as possible. So probably the biggest thing I'm thinking of, because cardboard is so much volume of what we're bringing in right now, a lot of what we do in this region just stays local and it goes to Pratt Industries. We've got a lot of folks from Pratt Industries here in Illinois, in Northwest Indiana now. It's local, it's regional. We try to keep it close to home. The paper folks that I'm thinking of, the sort of the high grade office paper that we bring into recycling services goes 200 miles north to Menasha. I feel like a lot of our mixed paper is going Kimberly-Clark, Georgia Pacific, like the folks that are turning that into tissues and toilet paper. So for us, it's trying to find the people closest to us that want to take as much as possible off of our hands, and then setting up goals and quotas, and keeping the material going out as quickly as it's coming into us. So there's probably more finite ways to figure these sort of process changed out. If I could see the sourcing sort of invoices that was coming out of Hodgkins or some of our other ancillary facilities to see who we're selling it to, but it's basically going to businesses. When we sell it, it's going straight to a business, and they're going to use it as their feedstock and turn it into product number 2.
And Marty wonders, is there a way that the general public could receive guidelines on a regular basis on what is recyclable? Perhaps an ad in the local newspaper. This might help in reducing the contamination. Most of us mean well, but just aren't sure.
Yep. I think things like that, there's never any harm that's going to come from more communication, especially when you never know how people are communicating. Some people are newspaper, some people are social media, some people are get on the webinar and find out direct from the horse's mouth. And I would say with that, depending on who your hauler is, if you know that you're paying a utility bill for your services each month, which means even if I'm your hauler, that it's being managed through a local municipality, go straight to your Department of Environment and say, hey guys, where are you putting this information out? And if you hear, well, it's on the website, just say, well, are you doing any push marketing with that right now? Is there anything that you can get from WM that's going to say, hey, cartons are good or cartons are bad this month? Or, what can we do so we get that direct feedback? Because one of the things that's interesting is that, we're constantly giving feedback to our point persons from, again, I'll go that municipal level, but sometimes, when you're the municipal rep for 100,000 homes, you don't necessarily know how that information is getting out there. So I think if your local folks are hearing that as consumers, you want to know this information, they'll probably bend over backwards to say, no, this is actually what we're spending your money on, and this is what you need to know about it.
And here, this person has a question. I'm going to give you a couple of them right now. What if the paper and the cardboard that you put in your recycling bin got wet from the rainstorm that after you put it out at night? And should we throw all paper away that gets wet? I mean,
No.
and also all this recycled material that we have, bottles and plastics and papers and all that, are they actually being used? So for the most part, are these recycled materials getting used, and what do we do about wet things?
So I'll start with wet first, because that's kind of a multi-point question. So there's a certain point, like hurricane conditions, things like that, where wet material is, we literally write it off as act of God. That was not an individual consumer that came in and dumped a bucket of water on top of their paper just to have fun with Megan that day. Like it didn't happen like that. So what's interesting about cardboard is the nature of cardboard design, because it is delivery packaging, is that it's generally can hold up to standard rain for about 24 hours before it starts to break down and then actually absorb that water into the fibers. So it'll shed quite a bit. For something like paper, if you're giving us the proper paper, something like a sheet of office paper, this paper is what you call a long fiber material. It's actually pretty strong. If this was at the bottom of your bin and your lid was pretty much closed, even if you had inclement weather all week, maybe it blew open on occasion, a few drops got in, this is probably still coming in relatively structural. So if you didn't have a bunch of napkins and paper towels and used tissues and things thrown in there, it's probably going to be usable. If something came in really wet, your lid blew back, there was a terrible deluge last night, there was 2 inches of water at the bottom, when we get that paper out and we sort it, it's going to have a heavier paper. Basically, the graders on the floor are going to have to look at that and say, is this bailable? Can we still sell it? What they might end up doing is calling our suppliers and saying, hey, we know you want dry paper. Can we sell you this paper at less dollars per ton? Because it's going to have a higher water content, because most people don't want to pay for water. But if they still want the fiber and they're like, all right, we'll knock this down to $1 a bale or something just so we can get it recycled and we'll take more bales of it, they know they're going to get that fiber. It's just going to be a little bit pulpy when it gets to them. So sometimes there's a little bit of give or take. So my default is always, we don't want people reaching into the bottom of their toter after they've thrown something in there and being unsafe. If we had bad weather, we had bad weather, and it's going to be what it's going to be. We're going to do our best as recyclers to do something productive with that material. If we have a hurricane condition come through, it happens in the South for us several times a year, and we can't do anything with it, and it's sludge when we pick it up, it's probably going to get landfilled, but that's not the consumer's fault. We don't want you to worry about that. When it gets to something like the question of the plastic, and correct me if I'm remembering this wrong, but like what's actually happening and what we're doing with it. For the most part, when we sell something like your plastic bottles to a plastic recycler, they're actually repelletizing that. So that grind that I talked about that they put on the material, they're going to be sorting themselves. What's number 1, what's number 2, what's number 4. And they're going to be remanufacturing that back down into a recycled feedstock that's going to be like REPET, recycled PET. And that recycled stock is going to be what they sell to a lot of folks that are using plastic in their own manufacturing process. So for us making that feedstock, it's like, let's give it to this plastic producer who's then going to sell it to a carpet company, who's then going to sell it to a recycled fleece manufacturer who makes sweatshirts out of it. They're going to buy a recycled product that's going to have that sort of recycled content, but it's going to be homogenized enough that they can use it. They're not necessarily buying just those plastic bottles, melting it down and trying to turn it into new products. So long answer along with that is that if we can turn it into something that somebody bought a bale of it from us, it got recycled into something else, because these companies aren't in the habit of buying something, not knowing what they're getting and taking all this garbage on that then they're going to have to pay to dispose of down the line, because that's just not the way that recycling works. And if we ourselves make a bale that we feel has too much garbage, it has too much of something in it that our customer isn't going to want, we usually won't sell it. We're going to look at that. We're going to look at it auditing before we put it on a truck. And we're going to say, it might be above 5%. We don't want that. Break the bale open. We'll have to decide if we're going to reprocess it or if it needs to be landfilled. So all of that stuff is sort of just a business as usual sort of quality assurance, quality control tech that we have to do as just part of recyclers as every day in order to make something that somebody wants to buy.
Okay, here we have a question. I love the contrast between consumer and corporation responsibility that you talked about. From a consumer perspective, do you think there are many consumers who don't believe cutting consumption is a solution, but instead technology should be the main solution?
I mean, absolutely. That gets back to the question, like, how can we change without changing? And this is at the heart of most of our environmental debates in this country, as we think about how do we tackle all of these big issues. And so there are definitely camps of people that would like to technology their way out of whatever the problem is. You know, carbon capture technology should be the answer to climate change. Better recycling technology should be the answer to our waste consumption problem. And it's just not realistic, right? Yeah. And so, I mean, we do need better technology, obviously, to do all of this, but we also really need to think long and hard about the fact that we per capita consume more than anyone else on this planet, and think about our consumption habits and how do we incentivize people to consume less, and how do we focus more on reduction and reuse.
And I'll just piggyback off of that too. And I'm going to go back into my past life, you know, when I was doing more consulting and green building development. But, you know, there was this sort of old adage in the early days of LEED and green building where we just said, you're not going to buy your way to sustainability. More stuff and more is never going to be the answer to some of these underlying issues. If we're making something outside of a circular model, then there's going to be waste product. And everybody's always a big fan of like, well, there's no waste in nature. And we're so far removed from the natural world right now as humans that I feel like it just kind of is what it is right now. And everybody's trying to do the best they can. But I do think I had this conversation with Courtney when we were getting ready, where I gave a presentation to a company a couple of weeks ago who was asking about bringing people back in the office, and they wanted to retool their program. And I just gave my 20 standard slides. It wasn't even this talk. It was, this is acceptable. This isn't acceptable. This is why we don't like cups. And that's all I said. I don't impart a lot of judgments on humans when I do this. It's like, here's your recycling rules. Please follow them. Thanks so much. Blessed be. And then I got a call from this guy 3 days later, and he was like, Megan, I've been using 6 disposable coffee cups a day. And I just realized the company bought us reusable mugs like 4 years ago. And every time I go to the break room, I take a disposable cup, and I wasn't thinking about it. And I was making garbage, and I've switched over to a tumbler. So part of me thinks that, yeah, there's probably half of these people that it's like technology is the solution, but there's still enough out there that are totally capable of putting 2 and 2 together and being like, I can help make less garbage. Does this mean I'm never going to use a disposable cup? No. Do I have to use one 6 times a day? No, I don't have to do that. So I think there's probably going to be a middle ground somewhere. Is obviously we're going to push technology, but especially as materials and sort of ingenuity and technology works on the other side of it, if we're making new product, new materials before the market even knows what to do with it, we're always going to be playing catch up. So at some point, Courtney's right, and things one way or another, they're going to get redesigned at some point, whether we want them to be or not. So
Okay. I see that it's 8 o'clock. And I promised the audience that we would end at 8, but this is probably one of the most popular topics that we've had. So I'm going to thank everybody for having attended. Actually, our team behind the scenes and Courtney and probably Megan is willing to stay over for maybe 15 minutes so we can get some of these questions answered. Because when we're in person, those people that actually want to still have the conversation, sometimes the speakers do stick around for a few minutes, and we do have some of that discussion. So I apologize to our people behind the scenes, but if you need to leave because we understand that we told you we were ending at 8 o'clock, I just want to say some of my concluding things quickly, and then we will answer some of the questions for those of you that want to hang around. And I want to thank our staff, Lean Click staff, Rebecca Griffiths and Samantha Click, for having helped us out tonight, and of course to our speakers. And don't forget to come back on May 12th to find out about that renewable energy, the fueling the future. And this event will be recorded. And if you're interested in sponsoring us, please do go to the link that is on our website. If you go to NIU STEAM, you can see where that is. And I think I pretty much covered it, other than we will send you a thank you and a survey link so that you can give us feedback. And believe me, we do use your feedback, and we do have programs that you have suggested. So with that, we are going to quickly go to some of these questions here. This person labels their plastic, the aluminum, etc., and they don't know for sure if it's best for them to separate them or not. If we have already answered this question in some other way, we need to answer some of these things as quickly as possible. Can food items like yogurt cups, and I'm curious about that too, be recycled in the plastic if they are rinsed? I hope so, because I do that. And what about labels on the plastic containers? Do they need to be removed? I hope not.
No. Don't remove your plastic labels. If you try to recycle your yogurt containers, definitely rinse them, because dairy, especially with the summer months coming, no mas. Yeah. It gets really smelly really quickly. But I would encourage everybody to check for that number, because there are some yogurt manufacturers that still do use number 6. If you don't see a number 6 on there, I would rinse it and try to recycle it, and you'll be fine.
Okay, this person has a comment. Pet peeve. She sees a lot of trash blowing around in the neighborhood, and she thinks it's on recycling days that she's seen this, and maybe it's a collection method. Her pet peeve is that the abundance of plastic bags that land in trees. Messaging about recycling plastic bags would be great. PR, I agree about the bags. I see them as I go down 88. Yeah. These plastic bags that are caught into everything.
Yep. I actually can jump in on that a little bit. So it's probably collection, but it's probably twofold. So we have a lot of people that overfill their toters and they leave the lids propped up on it, especially in prairie states like Illinois, where we are known for our high winds. If you get a wind current inside, and especially if you have a lot of that loose plastic, like the bags that we already said we don't want going in there in those films, it's really easy for that to become airborne litter. Similar to garbage cans. What's interesting about the garbage toters is as we put messaging out saying, hey, loose load your recycling, there's been a lot of folks that think that means throw your garbage loose into your toters as well. And so I've seen people kind of go through, take something like, the grocery store plastic bag, lift a garbage can lid and chuck that thing in there. And if that lid blows back or it gets overfilled, it's really easy for those bags to become litter. So the first step I would say is make certain that you're leaving your container low enough that that lid stays on securely. They're designed to be weighted heavily, short of monsoon season coming through. But but also making certain that as we dispose of things that are light, like even if I'm using a regular garbage, if I have a piece of plastic film, I tie about 7 knots in it just to give it mass before I put it in the garbage. And I use, I can't believe I'm saying this is recycler, I buy heavy duty garbage liners. Like when I've decided something has to go into the landfill, it goes into the landfill because I don't want it blowing around my neighborhood. I live in a wooded area myself, and I'm the same way. I see the litter everywhere and it drives me nuts. And I see all my neighbors with their recycling bins like this because they didn't want to break their boxes down. And it kind of causes this. So absolutely, I'm sure it's half collection, but I'm sure it's also not pulling that plastic film out, not pulling those strings out. So we really want to make certain that what we're putting in there has the ability to not go airborne. And that's another big reason we don't want the plastic films in the single stream, short of just what it does to our machinery when it comes in.
Okay, and these people have questions about, so what about styrofoam? Because it's on the, it can't be, I guess it can't be recycled. And so what happens to, how can we recycle some of these things that are not recyclable, I guess is the question here. And how can we prepare plastics that are not recyclable, and what can we do about it, basically?
If your plastic isn't recyclable, I'm going to put a pin in foam for a second, but say you've gotten a plastic bag, it had some sort of sticky candy product on the inside of it. It's a sticky little bag, we can't recycle it. You have to accept it as garbage. It's like you have to thank it for its purpose and put it into the garbage can because it was not designed for take back at that point in time. If it's something like foam and you realize you're making enough of it and it's clean, maybe it's not all coming from food. You're constantly buying a product and it's being shipped to you and you see a big block of foam. Foam can be really enticing and frustrating because if it doesn't come to us as a little tiny peanut, but a big block of foam, people think that we're going to see it, we're going to be able to process it and pull it out, it's big enough. Foam is usually 98% air. So even if we get a giant block, once it gets into a dump truck with a compactor bar, starts to break apart almost immediately. And then it's holiday morning and all the little pieces of foam are stuck everywhere and we're trying to pull it out and it makes for really dirty bales. If you've got enough of something, I would just start to Google my zip code, drop off, product. See if there's a dumpster, a container, a county group that does have a way to take that back in. Because if they're doing something with a local manufacturer where they say, I don't want your food foam, but I can take these blocks of foam and we'll at least get it put back into our own stream, it's a way to try to address some of that if you're so inclined to do it. If you can't get it done, then you have to accept that the foam has to go into garbage as well. So if it can't go into single stream, it doesn't mean that it can't. Like plastic bags are a prime example. We can take those back to any retailer in Illinois that provides them. They have to, by law, take those bags back and provide them a recycling avenue for them. So if there's not a take back and we can't find a drop off, it's garbage at that point, unfortunately.
Okay, we have to go to the next question.
Sorry.
Oh, no problem. I happen to be on sabbatical in Ireland as an European country and an island. I would say they are more successful at having less plastic and other packaging waste. But his big question is, could you say more about the fishing industry and about how the fishing industry is generating plastic waste? Because I think people weren't aware of that.
Yeah, so I can say something quickly. So the fishing industry, I think a lot of people still think of fishing boats as being small, and casting rods out, but they use massive plastic nets and traps now, and they trawl deep sea spaces for fish. And if lines get, if nets get cut or traps get cut from their buoys or their anchors, they just float in the ocean. And so the majority of the ocean plastic that we're seeing is residual waste from the fishing industry. So nets and traps and so forth that are just floating around.
I think we talked about the restaurants and bars and the recycling, and this person is wanting to have those people required to do some of those things. And this other person is asking about some of these Go Green campaigns. They're saying that they don't seem to be very successful, and even though they're trying to put people on guilt trips for overconsumption, and that it just doesn't seem to be going that well. I only got a few minutes, so I'm going to do this fast. And that some people just don't recycle very much, but they appreciated everything that you've been doing. It has been a very educational talk tonight. Courtney, did you know that individuals in DeKalb can recycle cooking fat? Just keep in can or jar and leave the container in a box near the door of the Kishwaukee Water Reclamation District, which is Old DeKalb Sanitary District office. It will then be combined with commercial fat/oils to generate electricity on site at KWRD. The source is a talk by KWRD Director Mark Eddington earlier today.
Awesome.
Okay.
Do you want me to respond to that? Yes. KWRD has been working on ways to recycle food waste products, including cooking fat. And so I knew that this was in the works. I didn't know that it was like there and ready to go, which is awesome. There's been some talk of partnering with NIU and campus cafeterias to recycle to compost food. We're not there yet, but there have been discussions ongoing, which is great. And so, yeah, there are cities around the country that have composting, like food composting programs. It requires a vast amount of education. Megan cringed when I asked her about this because of waste, like just waste issues.
I didn't cringe. I just said, yeah, and I trailed off. So
I mean, it is a direction that we should be going, because
Yes.
right now about 40% of total food waste in this country is, into our trash.
Yep.
And so, and there's a lot of methane off gas from food decomposition, which is of course a potent greenhouse gas. So there's lots of reasons to like divert food from our waste stream. It's just the like, how do we make this happen bit that is hard. And telling everybody to compost is not realistic. Like not everybody has the resources or the access to space and so forth. And so it's great that this is on the city's radar. They're starting to think about it, but it's preliminary.
So this person is wondering, how can we get our mayor involved in all these different local governments, and what is being done on the consumer level to educate communities? Do you know of any formal thing that is going on?
I don't know in DeKalb of any formal sort of recycling related education programs in DeKalb. We just had a mayoral election, so it'll be interesting to see how the incoming mayor is, how willing, I'll say, the incoming mayor is to work on a variety of environmental issues. We have an environmental committee for the city that works on stuff. They've been really involved in sort of native plant restoration and hopefully climate issues soon. But certainly waste management, recycling, all of that is something that we hope can be on their radar as well.
Yeah, and I'll just say a lot of that, it does come to municipalities. So I think I mentioned it earlier, but definitely, tell your local folks that you want that education. I'm going to go back to City of Elgin. And again, I wasn't involved in this other than giving a presentation at their library at one point in time. But when we started working with them on their contamination, they were sort of one of the early adopters of our, back before it was Recycle Right, it was Recycle Off and Recycle Right when we first started this. And they ran ads and posted billboards and did TV commercials. Like they kind of hammered down and had a really dedicated public address to talk about contamination and some of the recycling problems. And they were very invested because our transfer station is right there as well. So obviously we were picking it up and taking things really close and sorting it. So for us to come back and say, guys, we need your help with this because your contamination is too high, they had a fantastic attitude. So I can only imagine that there are things going on like that throughout different municipalities as they come online. But I think if they understand that their constituents are interested in hearing, it goes a long way towards motivating them to actually put that time and energy in.
There are a couple suggestions, by the way, in the chat that I have to share with everybody. Somebody says that there's blocks of styrofoam are accepted by the postal shop in Rockford at 2 different locations. Let me see, there was one other suggestion earlier on here. Somebody's saying they break their a pizza box apart. I do the same thing, put the dirty part in the garbage and the other part I recycle. So things that are marked 1, 2, or 5 but are not standard shaped containers should be thrown out if they're, I think you said that. There was here, does the public-private industry also have access to dump at the transfer station similar to their access to landfills? Do you get that? Does the private industry also have access to the dump
I think
at the transfer stations?
I think it depends on the transfer stations. A lot of transfer stations, depending on size and volume of what comes in, like our transfer station in downtown Chicago on Goose Island, absolutely not, because it is a constant traffic of Mack trucks coming in and out of there. So I think it depends on where we have a transfer set up in municipalities. What I would do is, just to plug my own company, go to wm.com. You can usually search by zip code location and find a contact number. And it'd be easy to go through a site, and a site will say if it's usually like what it takes in, what it's responsible for, and whether or not it's open to the public.
This person is saying she has some students, or he has some students, and they were talking about starting to make compost piles from their cafeteria food scraps. And they're wondering, would that be something that they could get started?
Yes, I would say, first of all, do a little mini waste assessment and see what's in that food. So if you're going to be managing this yourself, depending on size, one of the reasons waste management can take in through industrial composting, like the meat scraps and the fat and the dairy, is because our windrows are big enough and get hot enough that it will actually break that material down within 90 days. If you have too much of that material in a smaller compost bin, it can go anaerobic, almost like an open landfill, on you really quickly and get sour. And when it goes anaerobic and loses oxygen, things won't break down in a rapid pace. So you might be doing a disservice to your pile. So if especially you're taking in a bunch of things that might have been like an already dressed salad, something coated in olive oil, this or that, it can really impact. So it might be one of those things that rather than starting even with your post-consumption food, you could work with your kitchen staff on prep food and do like your tomato cores and your lettuce ends and some of the easy stuff that you could work in with your yard waste. And then that would be something that if you were going to pile it, it'd be much easier to maintain and see how much you made and what you would actually have to do, just an investment wise in time and size and space requirement and what you can divert.
And here's another suggestion for people. The Rockford NAACP, Environment and Climate Justice Team, is recruiting members because we talked about getting active here. And you can call 815-494-5666 if you want to get involved. So anyway, I wanted to share that information.
Thank you.
And we're running out of time again. This person is saying with a lot of the takeout containers, because we've all been taking everything out lately, they really have some poor recycling potential. And the person wants to recommend something to the owners as best practices, but we don't know what that recommendation is, but that might be a good idea to talk to those restaurants.
I will say what I've seen successful from the takeout world has been like sometimes the heavy duty soup containers. They're like 8 ounces or 16 ounces. They say 1 or 5 on the bottom. These things are hardcore. They're not messing around. When I get those in, I usually end up scrubbing them out. Sometimes I still don't put the lid on it unless it's a screw-on type of lid, because I'm always petrified that lid's going to pop off and be flat plastic in the middle of my stream somewhere. But that nice chunky product, I feel okay about washing those out and trying to recycle it. We're probably going to find it. But again, it's going to be something that reminds you of like that margarine tub or that ketchup bottle, because it's going to be so heavy duty.
This person is saying, what are some of these European regulations that encouraged more recyclable and reusable materials that are working? Where in North America do we have similar approaches? And is this basically a tax for non-reusable materials or a tax rebate for environmental safer materials? That might be something. They're wondering what was the incentive to do that?
So my understanding, and I could be wrong, is that this was passed by the European Union, and then it was up to individual countries to implement this law differently to be compliant. And so I would imagine that a number of different approaches have been adopted. Some could be, economic incentives or taxes, but it might just be law. Like you have to comply with this or you get fined, which is how, there's different strategies, of course, to getting. And so if you ban specific materials in packaging, like you're just literally not allowed to use that in the packaging, then the packaging world will shift.
This person says that this bag thing where the bags are flying around and all that, she takes those plastic bags to Walmart, and she wonders, well, what does Walmart do with them, and why can't Waste Management do the same thing that Walmart does, whatever that is?
It's because they get so incorporated into our single stream. So basically, when a retailer takes these back, they're going to be, most retailers have distribution centers and warehouses. So whereas, I have 10 Walmart stores, somewhere in the middle of that's a warehouse. And I've got trucks leaving daily and they're going to all my sites and they're replenishing stock. So that way people aren't having to have warehouse capabilities built onto every single retail outlet that they have. So what would happen is normally you go, you offload, and you have an empty truck that's going to come back. A lot of these distribution centers have been putting in apparatuses or mechanisms that say, okay, I'm picking up all the plastic bags from my stores. I'm bringing them back to one centralized location. And then just depending who my recycler is, that's how I'm going to process them. Maybe I'll bale them. Maybe I'll have them in big, oversized Gaylord boxes on pallets. But whatever it takes, I'm going to send it to this processor who's going to do the same thing as our plastics recyclers do. They're going to melt it down. They're going to pelletize it. But they're going to have a process that isn't a bunch of belts and screens like ours are, because ours were designed for rigid containers and to allow flat pieces of cardboard to float over the top of those star screens. For us, we can't get away from spinning belts. So anything that goes into our plant either goes airborne as litter, like it would in nature, because we have open air warehouses for all of our processing, or it gets sucked right into a piece of equipment and becomes a hazard for us. So with those folks, it kind of puts that back on the kind of where we wanted it to on the producer a little bit, that if these retailers are going to be putting millions of bags into the environment a year, we're going to say, at least in Illinois, you have to have a way to take these back out of the stream. And that way it's not the state's problem. It's not, a city's problem. It's not Waste Management's problem where they're losing all this capital investment on breakdowns. You did it. You take them out, because they know that between reusables and paper, there's a lot safer options, but plastic still tends to be the cheaper option. And that's why it's still in the marketplace.
Okay, here's a suggestion that Dart Container in Aurora on Evergreen Drive takes clean styrofoam food containers, trays, and all of that. So that's good to know. And this is going to be the final question, because we actually lied. We said we were going to end at 8:15, and so we're going to have to do this. But actually, I'm not sure. Maybe Becky can save these comments, and maybe we can have the speakers respond to them through email or something, because I think they are important. We want the audience to know that we care about the questions. But the final one is for Courtney. I liked your comment about being materialistic about our goods. How much recycled product can really be used in new products?
I appreciate her confidence in me, but I'm actually going to punt to Megan on this one, because she knows more about the recycling raw materials industry.
It depends on the product. So with recycling, it comes down to what you're making, and it also comes down to the nature of the product. So if you look at something, I'm going to go back to the sheet of office paper, because we get this in the junk mail, even if we've all gotten rid of our printers, it's still coming in. This can be 100% recycled. I can put this into 100% recycled content. Toilet paper, tissues, napkin, paper towel, new office paper, no problem. The problem is depending on what it gets made into, it has the ability to be downgraded. So once you use this as toilet paper, it ain't getting recycled again after that. It might go through a municipal system. Hopefully it'll be captured, waste to energy downstream, but it's only going to be recycled a finite number of times. Same thing with plastics. Usually there's going to be a slight degradation process where maybe that plastic bottle was awesome and it got turned into rPET and it became that fleece sweatshirt. Then what can you turn that fleece sweatshirt into? It might go to recycling. It might go to reuse, like a Goodwill, like something like that further down, where it gets used and used and used. And at the end of its life, when it's all rags and tatters, if I didn't have a way to recycle textiles, it might still end up in a landfill. If it's something like an aluminum can is 100% recyclable and pretty much infinitely recyclable. Most cans, though, are only still 66% recycled material, because you still have to supplement all the aluminum we're losing to the landfill stream because of inefficiencies in take back procedures. So that kind of goes back to our original goal of what what we put on the signs and the labels, depending on whatever region of the country we're recycling in. Please give us those things, because we know that we have outlets and we have people and consumers and other companies that want to be able to use the material, but it's all going to vary based on what we're trying to make, because there's never going to be a 100, well, I shouldn't say never, maybe someday when things are circular, there will be something that's infinitely take backable. But right now we want to get as much use out of something that we had to dig out of the ground, extract out of this plant, cut down a forest for, as we can before it has to hit the landfill or before it hits end of life.
Okay, and we have a suggestion here from Austria, the person from Austria. In Austria, you get a rather small garbage can, pay dearly for a larger one or second pickup. That incentivizes the citizens to take their glass cans and paper to recycle bins to minimize garbage. No tax, just simple economics, which brings us to Courtney, the final comment about how this STEM Cafe does definitely connect with Financial Literacy Month, and that it all is about how it hits the pocketbook.
Yep.
Yeah, and I should also just say, like, we are going to pay for the consumption and processing of the goods now or in the future, but there will be environmental externalities to us not thinking about our consumption habits. And so, yes, better to think carefully about how we reduce our consumption or reuse our products now than dealing with sort of the recycling stream in the first place. And that should be our second on the list go-to.
Yep.
Well,
Everything Courtney just said.
anybody have a final comment? This is it? Anything final to say? Okay. We want to thank everybody for having attended, those of you that are left, and our behind the scenes people, Becky and Sam. And we're just happy our speakers are here, Courtney and Megan, and thank you so much for your time. And we're going to hopefully try to capture the remaining questions that we didn't get answered, so that maybe they could email answers to some of the people, because we do have your emails. And anyway, thank you everybody for attending. We hope that you join us on May 12th, I think it is. And thank you very much, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.